What's up, everybody? Who's out there? What happened, everybody? Where'd everybody go? Oh, dear. There we go. That's more like it. What's up, everybody? How are we all doing? What's up, everybody? Oh, let's kill the volume. What's up, Glenn? What's up, Ken? What's up, Mark? What's up, Aki Guinea? What's up, Bran? What's up, Andrew? What's going on? Ah, now they're showing up. I was getting worried there. I was going to have to call it off. This is, I know the comic book stuff isn't generally very popular, but this is going to be the craziest story you've ever heard me tell. I mean, this is insane. These people are seriously bent, and we're talking lots of crazy real world stuff going on behind the scenes. So you're in for I don't know if you're in for a treat, but you're in for an experience. All right, you're definitely in for an experience because just as usual, I overprepared. I don't know if I might have to sort of zoom through some of the, not read all the slides. I mean, there's a ton of material. There are 4 different presentations to go through, but this is seriously bent. I mean, this is probably one of the craziest stories in comic book history that I can think of, and it's so layered. There's so many levels to it. Here we go. People are showing up. This is good. I was getting a little worried there. I was going to have to postpone. Maybe I started a little too early. But there's going to be a lot of material here for me to make little clips out of and edited versions. Yeah. All right, here we go. Now it's a party. I'm going to start at 9:35. I don't want to keep everybody waiting, and plus there's just so much material to go through. These shattered men behind these stories that we tell our children. If people only knew, they would not take their kids to Superman movies, that's for certain. Adults only, I think. Rated X. NC-17 at least. If judging by the real stories we're going to be getting into. This one's got it all. We've got occultism. Even got a little Jack Parsons action going on. A little Aleister Crowley action going on. Your favorites. We've got some cults. Maybe not cults, but murder gangs. Death cultists, I guess you would say. Gangsters. Criminals. Assassination attempts. This one truly has it all. Oh my goodness. Let me just see who's in the chat. Matt, what's up? User 13, what's up? Fargoth, what's up? My Third Eye, Thor at the Door. TM Warren, what's up? What is going on? Yeah, we got a show tonight, folks. We definitely have a show. Again, I might have to sort of breeze through some of this stuff because I don't want to keep you here till 3 o'clock in the morning. I've got 4 different slide presentations assembled. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to stop myself. I'm just it's the OCD. People don't realize, maybe it's the OCD and the ADHD too, because When you've got ADHD, you tend to hyperfocus on things. And of course, OCD, you tend to obsess on things. So a little of both. A little of both. What's up, Janet? What's up, Magic Star? What's up, Gia? Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is two extremely troubled men. Extremely troubled men with very harsh lives. I was going to say harsh life conditions or harsh life situations. I think in some ways too, there's like something psychologically or maybe cognitively wrong with both of them. Because despite what you might have heard, these guys made a lot of money on Superman, and somehow they just blew it away. I don't know what happened to all the money they made, but they found themselves in extremely dire straits for sure. 33 illuminating. Oh no, 34, 104. Oh my God! That's well, obviously in Fahrenheit. What is it here? Oh, it's only 73 here. Is it still 104 there, Glenn? What's going on? Anyway, yeah. So let me get started so we can keep this relatively timely. I don't want to be here all night. And I'm going to sort of be evaluating on the fly which stuff we should focus on and which stuff we should maybe breeze through, but we'll go for it. Oh my goodness. All right. Here we go, folks. This is called, as you can see, The Shattered Psyches Behind Superman. And when I get through this presentation, you're going to see that that is not hyperbole at all. These were two extremely troubled men in very many ways, as are so many of the people who have created our fantasy stories. And it leads you to believe, like, what is in the DNA of these characters, right? What is being transmitted in a way that is sub rosa, okay? What is being transmitted subtextually? Is there something being transmitted that comes through where their psyches, these two men and their extremely damaged psyches, are they being transmitted through their creation? Okay, and I'll get into this, but first I'm going to read a few opening statements, okay, because I just want to set this out so you can see where we're going to be going. Full disclosure, I am not, nor have I ever been, a Superman fan. Something about the character has always felt off, as well as stifling and vaguely disturbing. Superman always came across like someone hiding his true nature, and his stories feel like lies he's telling himself. The only Superman material I actually liked were the old Fleischer Brothers cartoons, which are cartoon noir masterpieces. Okay. Now, I'll be interested to hear if anybody disagrees or agrees with me about these gentlemen and this creation, that Superman always feels like we're not being told the whole story. There's just something missing, okay? There's a hollowness with this character. Most superhero comics in the ludicrously misnamed Golden Age were the lowest order of pop culture, the absolute most poorly written, poorly visualized nonsense ever produced in mass culture. Pumped out by the pound by semi-autistic teenagers and tossed off into mob-run newsstands by semi-criminal publishers. So this whole story, I mean, so many of the publishers were either actual criminals or borderline criminals, and the mafia and various mobs ran all the newsstands because they were prime money laundering venues, okay? So that is a big part of it. A lot of comics fans, I mean, I tend to be skeptical about some of the numbers you hear that Superman was selling like 1 million copies a week or whatever, because of how corrupt the system was. They would just throw bundles away and say they were unsold. Anyway, on an objective level, Superman is a collection of plagiarisms from then popular pulp heroes, liberally sprinked with borrowings from the Bible and Greek myth. On a psychological level, Superman is entirely unwholesome, a self-centered, antisocial, narcissistic God delusion that has fed all manners of sociopathy. Now, this might sound extremely harsh, but I'm going to back all that up with expert opinion, all right? Because this was widely recognized when we still had grown-ups in charge of everything, all right? We're going to talk about how this did not fly under people's radar, that this character, particularly in his early incarnation, which was much different maybe than the character that people are used to today. I mean, Superman was a sociopath in his early stories, created by the men that we're going to be discussing. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were sub-mediocre talents who were in the proverbial right place at the right time. Okay, now that sounds harsh as well, but you're going to see that it's true. These were sub-mediocre talents who just got lucky, and but also had one great gimmick that we're going to talk about. Despite all the mythology, they were not cheated or ripped off by DC. They were both very highly paid for their work. Their real problem was they got greedy and sued to change the terms of their contracts several years after the facts. Siegel and Shuster were not villains, but neither were they the victims of nerd boy propaganda. They were also extremely psychologically shattered, as their work plainly displays. These were men whose minds were broken, okay? These were broken minds. And you're going to see that in full color as we get into this presentation. Well, there's nothing wrong with a little escapism. Escapism is a good thing sometimes, right? In measured doses. Nerd geek power compensatory fantasy has become a parasite, feeding on both its producers and its consumers, okay? Superheroes are fundamentally and irreducibly childish and have been used to pimp childish fantasies like space exploration, transhumanism, and perpetual technological progress, as well as cancerous ideologies like globalism and open borders migration. Keeping adults locked in childish fantasy also keeps adults locked in childish sexuality. I'm going to repeat that. Keeping adults locked in childish fantasy also keeps adults locked in childish sexuality, which is why pedophilia and transgenderism have exploded on a mass scale never before seen in history. Okay? The flights from reality created by deeply damaged and often profoundly morally compromised creators like Stephen King and Gene Roddenberry are too often cited as some kind of authoritative scripture by deluded geeks. Roddenberry in particular. I'm always hearing Roddenberry this, Roddenberry that from Trekkers, older Trekkers, obviously. Roddenberry was a horrible human being in every conceivable way, okay? Instead of entertaining, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, there's nothing wrong with escapism at all, but total immersion in childish power fantasy has been an unalloyed social catastrophe, especially for men. A culture in which middle-aged men immerse themselves in stories originally created for pre-adolescent boys is a degenerating and failing culture. No reasonable person can disagree that our current popular culture isn't a degenerating failure in which nothing new of value is being created or can be created. We need new, grown-up stories, even if the childish old stories are still useful to social manipulators and profitable to multinational corporations. Okay. That's throwing it down. That's throwing down the gauntlet, okay? But this is really what I felt very strongly about after finishing this this presentation. I just felt like there's just something wrong, and we're letting these minds into our consciousness, into our psyche. We're letting their energy infect our energy, okay? And that has to end. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with entertainment. There's nothing wrong with escapism. But when it becomes your sole diet of information, as happened in this culture for the past 15 years or so, we've got a problem. And you're going to see exactly why when we go through the rogues gallery of individuals involved in this story. Shadoobie, shattered. And so what do I mean by shattered? I mean, these are men whose psyches were broken, okay? And their brokenness was, their inner brokenness, their interior brokenness, their interior shattered consciousness was expressed in just the way everything fell apart for them, okay? The way that they had it all and they blew it all. And they got really low. Things went really, really wrong. But I think there's just something fundamentally wrong with these two. As can be said about many creatives, certainly in the comics industry, obviously in film and so on. But these were men whose brokenness, you know how when you hear about people who win the lottery, people who are just total F-ups, and they win the lottery and just everything becomes worse for them? Kind of the story here, all right? It's kind of the story here. Writer Jerome Siegel was born in Cleveland on October 17th, 1914. Wasn't that the start of World War I? Jerry's father owned Michael's Men's Furnishings, a second-hand clothing store on Central Avenue. Jerry recalled his earliest science fiction work being printed in the kids section of the Buffalo Times around 1927. Jerry Siegel's early writing style was heavily influenced by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the creator of Tarzan, and John Carter of Mars. Siegel would later meet his idol Burroughs while he was stationed in Hawaii during World War II. Okay, so these guys were drafted in the middle of the wars. Were many people. Jack Kirby was drafted and had to fight behind enemy lines. He was assigned reconnaissance. So one thing I will say, though, is that one of the reasons why so many of the post-war stories were so powerful is that because the men who were writing them had powerful experiences. And it's very difficult to have powerful fiction, particularly, without powerful experiences to draw on. Artist Joseph Shuster was born on July 10th, 1914. Birthday was 2 days ago. In Toronto, Canada, Joe took an early interest to art and began drawing at the age of 4. At 9, Joe started his first job hawking newspapers for the Toronto Daily Star while attending Ryerson Public School. In August 1924, the Shuster family relocated to the Cleveland, Ohio area. Joe worked as a staff artist for the school newspaper of Alexander Hamilton Junior High. His first comic strip printed was about a grasshopper named Jerry the Journalist. The stories were written by Jerry Fine, editor of the paper and a cousin of Jerry Siegel. And there's a picture of them looking over a Superman poster. After they'd made it big. Now, this character here is somebody who a lot of people don't know about, but should know about. This is one of these kind of people who America used to be able to create, but somehow lost the ability to do so. A true American maverick named Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson, who is, I believe, the grandfather of Dana Wheeler-Nicholson, who, just as a little bit of an aside, was my visual model for Daja in He Will Live Up in the Sky. So let's talk about Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson. He was a major in the Army. He got himself into a lot of trouble. Let's read about this. Major Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson's public criticism of Army command in an open letter to President Warren G. Harding and his accusations against senior officers led to countercharges, hearing, and a lawsuit against West Point Superintendent General Sladen. Wheeler-Nicholson was also the victim of a shooting that his family called an Army-sanctioned assassination attempt. It left him hospitalized with a bullet wound. Following this, Wheeler-Nicholson in June 1922 was convicted in a court-martial trial of violating the 96th Article of War in publishing his open letter. Although he was not demoted, he resigned his commission in 1923. His $100,000 lawsuit against Sladen was dismissed by the New York State Supreme Court the following year. So this guy blew the whistle on the army and they tried to kill him. Okay? Oh my goodness. Major Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson began as an adventure pulp writer in 1924 and founded the Nicholson Publishing Company as a newspaper syndicate. In the autumn of 1934, the Major launched National Allied Publications, also known as National Allied Newspaper Syndicate Incorporated. On July 11, 1935, National released New Fun Number 1, the first regularly published comic book comprised of all original material. So this guy was a true trailblazer, okay? This is the first publisher, because most comic books were just reprints of newspaper strips. Wheeler-Nicholson reviewed sample sketches from Joe Shuster that were submitted on the old wallpaper from Toronto. So the Schusters were so poor that he had to draw on like wrapping paper and old wallpaper, whatever he could find. These are the days before mass manufacturing, which really started with World War II. Anyway, so a lot of things were expensive. In a later dated June 6, 1935, Wheeler-Nicholson offered Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster a feature in New Fun as an audition for the magazine. Joe borrowed money from his parents to purchase proper art paper, and the team was paid $20 for 2 pages. That's a tidy sum in 1935, believe me. The black and white stories were printed in New Fun number 6, dated October 1935. And a lot of these quotes are from a site called Candor Archives and a gentleman named Clint Cerula, who looked into the history of this. So this on the left is More Fun or New Fun, new comic strips, and so on. And on the right is Detective Comics number 1. You're going to see a lot of very ugly, racist caricatures in this story, all right, which was just very common at the time, and particularly about Asians. We're going to see a lot of it. So I'm just, if you have any sensitivities, I'm just warning you now. As it has been said, I remember listening to an interview with Ramsey Clark ages ago, and he talked about how all the comic strips and comic books when he was growing up were all about violence. And we tend to overlook that because the drawing is so crude and it doesn't really communicate. But when you really start to look at this stuff, particularly the Siegel and Shuster stuff, it's all very intimate violence. People shooting people, stabbing people. I mean, we see on the right here somebody with a razor slashing at somebody with a Tommy gun on the left. Tremendous amount of violence in these stories, all right? And it only got worse, by the way. Now, Gladiator. This is the birth of Superman. This is the first Superman, okay? This is where Siegel and Shuster got the idea. This was a novel by a gentleman called Philip Wiley, who I believe was a pastor. I think he was like a congregational pastor. He wrote the story about a man who was basically created. And we see the exploitative cover on the right. Believe me, I've read this story, and it's nothing like what you see on the right. It's much different. Anyway, Gladiator. This is Superman. This is the basis for Superman, the original basis for Superman. Gladiator by Philip Wiley was first published in 1930. Professor Abednego Danner genetically alters his son Hugo to create an invulnerable superchild. Hugo Danner is raised in a rural Colorado town and taught to conceal his powers. At an early age, see if this sounds familiar, Hugo says, "I can jump higher than a house. I can run faster than a train." Hugo tells his father, I'm like a man made out of iron instead of meat. Oh, yes. So, yeah, Jerry Siegel was obviously a big fan of this book. To isolate himself, Hugo constructs a solitary fortress in the wood. Oh, a fortress of solitude. Hugo considers becoming a super detective that punishes criminals but ultimately wanders the planet as a loner. In 1979, Jerry Siegel wrote, I had read and enjoyed Philip Wiley's book, The Gladiator. It influenced me too. And again, from Clint Cerula. All right. Now, Marvel had done an adaptation of the book in 74, I believe, in Marvel Preview. And if you look at the images on the right, those were just basically taken straight from the book for the Superman, first, the original stories about Superman, his origin stories and so on. Obviously not from this, because this was published, almost 40 years later. But, they're both drawing from the same source material. Now, this was the first incarnation of the Superman, the reign of the Superman, and it's just basically, we don't need to get into it, it's just basically a straight up rewrite of Gladiator with some, Nietzschean flavoring. Siegel's writing under the nom de plume Herbert S. Fine, okay? So, another thrilling story by the writer of Snaring the Master. Okay, that's fine. So this was the first iteration of Superman. Short story and the illustration by Joe Shuster. All right. Now, this is rather well known too. Superman and Batman were modeled after one of the world's first superheroes. So we have Gladiator, which is a major influence, and the other major influence is Doc Savage. Okay, this is an illustration by the artist. What's his name? Oh, Alex Ross, and he's obviously using what's his name? Dolph Lundgren as a model there on the left. So this is Doc Savage, the man of bronze. Okay, he had bronze skin. Guess he liked to tan. Maybe it was a spray-on tan. I'm not exactly sure. Oh, hold on a second. Oh my goodness. Pulp hero Clark Savage, known as Doc Savage, was created by Henry W. Ralston, John L. Nanovic, and writer Lester Dent. Clark Savage debuted in Doc Savage magazine March 1933, released on February 17th, 1933. They would obviously post-date the issues. From a young age, Clark possessed superhuman strength and superior intellect. The first adventure is titled The Man of Bronze. In the May 1933 story, Quest of the Spider, Savage is referred to as a Superman. Elements of Doc Savage are similar to Hugo Danner in Gladiator. Doc Savage retreats to a fortress of solitude located in the Arctic. The Superman Fortress of Solitude was later introduced by Mort Weisinger, who became Jerry Siegel's boss in 1958. Later in 1933, Jerry Siegel imagined the Superman as a bulletproof brawler similar to Doc Savage. No longer a villain, as we saw before, the strongman now billed as a genius in intellect, a Hercules in strength, a nemesis to wrongdoers, the Superman. The hero was not from another planet, and there was no dual identity as of yet. That came a couple years later. Once again, the superpowers were bestowed upon the Superman by a scientist. Jerry compared this version to the ancient Israelite superhero Samson, okay? Which is, I guess, a little more convenient than comparing it to Doc Savage, right? Now here we go. Doc Savage changed quite a bit later on. Was just basically sort of a strongman figure, sort of like a college football player on the left, and then became this much more stylized figure with the ripped clothing and so on. The Man of Bronze. And here we see an ad from the mid-30s for Doc Savage. Superman, Doc Savage, man of master, mind, and body. Follow his glorious adventures every month in the Doc Savage magazine. Okay. So the pulp superheroes are really the models for all the superheroes that followed. Okay. And we see here the Man of Bronze, Doc Savage magazine, later became the Man of Steel in the person of Superman. We see Henry Cavill here. All right. We'll get into that at a later date, I guess. Zack Snyder. I still haven't seen this film, even though I love Diane Lane, as you all know. Just no interest in any superhero movies at all anymore. I'm done. Spend too much of your life on these things and you lose your appetite for them. But Henry Cavill was very well cast, by the way. All right, so throwing down the gauntlet again. Thoroughly unpleasant garbage. What am I referring to here? Well, I'm referring to the early work of Siegel and Shuster, which is not only terribly written and terribly drawn, but is thoroughly unpleasant. Stories about thoroughly unpleasant people doing thoroughly unpleasant things. For the life of me, I can't understand why. They got work, but, these publishers needed to fill the pages somehow. So this is one of their early strips called Spy. And we just see a lot of sexual antagonism, like a lot of antagonism between women and men. In the page on the right, this woman is trying to poison this character who looks sort of like Clark Kent or proto-Clark Kent, right? And goes outside and a man and a woman are fighting. All of it is just all violence and arguing and conflict, but it's also unbelievably incoherent. These stories just don't make any sense. Terrible execution here. Like I said, I think that, Jerry Siegel had some interesting, he was a good idea person in some ways, but he was terrible writer. Joe Shuster, there are people who are fans of that style, which is, very primitive kind of style. He's in his late teens, but, Bill Sienkiewicz was drawing like Neil Adams. That doesn't mean anything to you people, but there are people who are in their late teens who could draw like great masters. So, his age is no excuse. And again, here, just these sexual antagonisms. I apologize for the poor quality. It's very hard to find good quality reproductions of these. But a lot of also sexual innuendo and so on. And again, a lot of sexual antagonism and violence. It's like every panel is just, there's no rest from the conflict in any of these stories. As we see here, somebody being shot at point blank range, I'll kill you with my bare hands. They're slaughtering themselves. Just a tremendous amount of rage in this gentleman here in Jerry Siegel that lasted his entire life. A tremendous amount of anger, tremendous amount of rage, and particularly a lot of rage against women. Okay. But again, this is typical in some ways of the period. And we see a guy get punched in the dick. And like I said, there's no let up from the conflict and antagonisms in these stories. People are just hitting each other and shooting each other and stabbing each other. It's like on every page. It's just really, really unpleasant. But again, I think this is a reflection of Jerry Siegel's broken psyche. Okay, I think that this incoherent, constant violence is definitely a psychological disorder, right? And then he creates. So there were a lot of prototypes for Superman. This is one of them, Slam Bradley, and we see with the ripped shirt on the left, a la Doc Savage. Since you're too old to be spanked, there's a lot of weird kind of inappropriate sexual kind of stuff in these stories, as we'll see. So again, a tremendous amount of violence. The story on the left is not drawn by Joe Shuster, but Joe Shuster was not a good artist, but he had a style. His stuff had a look. Which I think people appreciated. It's kind of almost like outsider art. Too Old to Be Spanked, yes. Conceived by Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson and developed by Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the character Slam Bradley first appears in Detective Comics #1 and is depicted as a hard-bitten, tough private eye who loves working for dames. Now, this is very crucial here. You're going to see a lot of this. But prefers the platonic company of his boy sidekick, Shorty Morgan. Yeah, so Slam Bradley was originally outlined by Wheeler-Nicholson in a May 13th, 1936 letter. So there's May 13th for all you spotters of those types of things. Yes, but prefers the company of his boy sidekick, which, oh my goodness. And there's his boy sidekick, yes. And apparently they live together. Yeah. And, Slam's walking around without a shirt and showing off his muscles to his young boy. And we're going to see this as a young boy, too. This isn't like a short teenager. And they're going to go out to Hollywood together. Hollywood murders. And he's getting in the action. Shorty there. What's his name again? Shorty. It is Shorty. He's just the violence just never ends in these stories. And again, it's depicted so crudely that you might not recognize it for what it is, but it's pretty relentless. And there's look at that shirt he's wearing. It's like something David Lee Roth would have worn on the Jump tour or something. What is that shirt? Oh my goodness. Hello, Sailor. Yes, Shorty. Yeah, there you go. And of course, the ever-present caricature of the henpecked husband and the harridan wife that you see in every single comic strip and comic book back in the old days. I don't know what it was, but you always see the weak man and the domineering woman in every one of these stories, okay? So we see here, this is Shorty's in class here, getting hit. And somebody says, oh, look at the sissy. Isn't he cute? So those are like, 8-year-old kids. So Slam Bradley's hanging around with an 8-year-old boy, and that's weird. But, par for the course for comic books. So again, everybody's always angry. Everybody's always hitting each other. Everybody is always arguing in every one of these stories. And we'll see that Superman is the same way. These are all dry runs for Superman. Slam Bradley is definitely a prototype for Superman, as we'll see. And again, a lot of racist caricatures. This is Arabs, and the Arab hits him in the head with a lamp, and then Slam Bradley punches him in the stomach, and then he's strangling him, and the Arab is saying, "I'm strangling." Again, and it's almost like the crudeness makes the violence just even more revolting. This was not an easy live stream to work on, okay? Getting inside these people's heads is not a pleasant experience. And again, more racist stereotypes. We see these really grotesque Chinese stereotypes on the left, and then these Mexicans. Are they meant to be black or something? I mean, they got black faces and those old big lips that we saw in all those characters. We saw a lot, in any comic strip, and, black characters always had almost like simian lips. I mean, really, really offensive. But anyway, a lot of this, you see a lot of this. Okay, but again, all the violence, the trains being robbed, and everybody's just always just hitting each other in these stories. And again, more of the caricatures. We see that the colorist tried to tone it down a bit when it was recolored. And everybody's always arguing, "You bonehead, why did you let her enter? Wait for me, I'll be right down." So just constant conflict and unpleasant situations. "Come on, you yellow rats, slam Bradley." This girl's being whipped. All these stories, all the pulps and men's sweat magazines and early comic books. You always had the white women being whipped by, Chinese or tribesmen, black tribesmen and so on. So there we go, more of that. And this is Goober the Mighty, a very offensive black stereotype. And of course, the princess, the white princess, is talking about how handsome and brave the stranger is. The sexual and racial politics in all these stories are not appropriate for modern audiences, let's just say. Siegel and Shuster, yes. But again, the very, very crude drawing and the constant antagonisms in every panel. And then also the weird sexual innuendo between male characters. Say you're pretty good, you're not so bad yourself. And Slam seems to be fighting his twin there. And again, both those characters look identical to the early Superman, as does, Slam on the right. If I wasn't so sore at you, I'd kiss you, boy. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So, former bully of his schoolboy days. So obviously Jerry Siegel was probably bullied quite a bit when he was young. But if he wasn't so sore, I'd kiss you. Okay, that's interesting. So that's Slam Bradley. All right, the Occult Superman. Okay, so these are the stages, the development of the Superman character, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. All right, this is where it gets kind of interesting. The Occult Superman. Dr. Mystic, the occult detective. Dr. Mystic, foe of supernatural evil, increases in size and renders himself semi-material through an old mystic ritual. Shrieking City, two giants engage in mortal combat. All right. And we see, yet again, Dr. Mystic, or as we'll see later, Dr. Occult, looks, exactly like Superman. I mean, I wonder if Joe Shuster knew how to draw any kind of other characters, because they all look like Superman. And very, very interesting. Jerry Siegel obviously read a lot of pop occultism, and I wonder if he maybe subscribed to the Rosicrucian kind of materials that were always being advertised in comic books and pulps and so on. Because one of these characters, well, this is Zator. There's another interesting name here, but again, identical to Superman, and will become even more identical to Superman. Monstrous creatures of the netherworld seek to snare the travelers, first by fright. Yes, so we see all the, all these, and the naked women. Interesting. That's very interesting. I guess when they cover up the nipple somehow there, and I guess it's a trap. It's like a siren there. Okay. So these demon characters in the mist, right? Sort of otherworldly intruders, as we've talked about. Now, Dr. Mystic soon becomes Dr. Occult, okay, the mystic detective. So he starts off as Dr. Mystic, the occult detective, and becomes Dr. Occult, the mystic detective. And this gentleman turns into a werewolf, so he's dealing with werewolves. here, and we see that Dr. Occult is identical to Superman. Okay. And here he's basically Superman. He's got the red cape and he's got blue shorts and so on. Sent to an Egyptian tomb by a group of ancient magicians known as the Seven. So a lot of secret societies were in these stories. Very, very interesting. All the kind of things that people look for today were just par for the course in a lot of these stories. So we have Dr. Occult battling or working for, I guess, an ancient magicians known as the Seven. All right, so there he is, almost flying, right? And there he is again. So, I mean, that's Superman. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that is Superman. And plus, he's got magical powers. He's got powers to cross dimensions and become a giant, semi-material giant, and so on. So, very interesting that the immediate precursor to Superman was this occult figure, Dr. Occult. Okay, Dr. Occult. Dealing with a character called Koth or Koth. Sounds like something out of either Egyptian mythology or Lovecraft. Okay. And again, he's Superman. And look he's got a crest on his chest, some sort of almost like a, is that in the previous pages? No, he's given this crest that we see here that's triangular. So they're clearly working towards Superman here. Oh, it's the protective symbol of the Seven. That's what the crest is. You know, the morphs into the Superman logo. Superman S. Okay. And we see that big green character wearing that, right? The protective symbol of the Seven. Right? So this is the immediate precursor to Superman, an occultist who works for magical secret societies. Right? I mean, what else can I say? All right. Now, they're one great gimmick. Okay. Now, obviously, superheroes existed in the pulps, were very popular. The Shadow, Doc Savage, the Spider, the Avenger, several others. But one thing that Superman, I think, made the difference, and this is a branding exercise. Now, the Shadow obviously had very characteristic and identifiable clothing, you know, the big trench coat and the cape and the scarf and the big hat and so on and so forth. But Doc Savage did not. And these other characters more or less dressed in street clothing. The great gimmick, and this is a branding exercise, this is very, very important, was the costume. All right? Superman's costume, that's what made him successful. That's what set him apart. I really do believe that. Now, the first costume superhero was the Phantom, created by Lee Falk. All right, as we see here. I believe there was one earlier one, but this is the best known one. This is the most well known one. The Phantom, Lee Falk. All right. And there was a movie made back in the 90s with Billy Zane as the Phantom, of all people. I have it on DVD. Batman creators admitted his first appearance was plagiarism. So there's the Shadow on the right. The first Batman story is a rewrite of an old Shadow story. Everything about Batman is plagiarized. Everything about Superman is plagiarized. But again, the costumes are really what put these characters over. Wonder Woman is plagiarized from Amazona, the Mighty Woman. I mean, how much more obvious does it get, right? Except for she lives in the far north and not on a paradise island. She and her people are the last survivors of a super race that perished during the period of the last great ice age. So again, I mean, Amazon is just a straight off ripoff of Amazona, the Mighty Woman. I mean, Wonder Woman's even on Amazon. But again, it's the branding, it's the costumes. That's what sells it. You know, what made Kiss so successful? What set them apart, even though they weren't, I mean, let's be honest, a very good band. They didn't write very good songs. It was the costumes, all right? That is a surefire gimmick with kids. And that's what made Superman so successful, even though he was not one iota different from any number of other characters, particular characters that he's taken from. But it's the costume, all right? Enter the Chiselers. Yes, the Chiselers, okay? Publishing industry, particularly back then, was mobbed up. Talking about Jack Leibowitz and Harry Donenfeld, okay? Jack Leibowitz, and that artist made them look rather similar. That's kind of weird. Let's talk about Jack Leibowitz and Harry Donenfeld. Major Wheeler-Nicholson planned to launch 2 more magazines, Detective Comics and Action Comics. In order to finance the venture, he turned to Harry Donenfeld and his accountant, Jack Leibowitz. Donenfeld owned a printing plant and the newsstand distributor, Independent News Co., which he owned for quite a long time, and they had a huge monopoly. Donenfeld had a negative reputation for publishing spicy pulps. Negative with who? That featured erotic stories and softcore porno photos. Writers often complained of not receiving payment. Well, that's not cool. Donenfeld was connected to Frank Costello, boss of the Luciano crime family. During Prohibition, alcohol shipments from Canada were smuggled into America with cheap magazine pulp paper. So I guess they were dealing with the Seagram's people, right? So, yeah. So Donenfeld was smuggling alcohol from Canada with his paper. In November 1933, Donenfeld was arrested in New York for distributing obscene material. I remember Fiorello LaGuardia, of all people, was obsessed with shutting down all these pulp magazines. In June 1935, the FBI began investigating Donenfeld publishing companies for interstate transportation of obscene literature. Director J. Edgar Hoover took personal interest in the case. I'm sure he did. I am sure he did. Now, well, this is what they thought was pornographic. I'm a huge fan of this stuff. I love these covers. I love this art style. Yeah, I love this stuff. Very refreshing to look at after all that Siegel and Shuster nonsense. But apparently this was too spicy for mainstream America in 1935. Okay, a little bit too edgy, a little bit too spicy. I love those covers. Anyway. Cash flow problems continued, forcing Wheeler-Nicholson to sell his publishing business to Donenfeld and Leibowitz in 1937. In 1938, this is like such a classic move. Oh my God, this is hilarious. In early 1938, Donenfeld sent Wheeler-Nicholson and his wife on a cruise to Cuba to work up new ideas. When they came home, the Major found the lock to his office door changed. In his absence, Harry Donenfeld had sued him for non-payment and pushed Detective Comics Inc. into bankruptcy court. One of Harry's old Tammany Hall buddies had been appointed interim president of the firm and arranged a quick sale of its assets to Independent News. Harry gave the Major a percentage of More Fun Comics as a shut-up token and wished him well. What a scumbag. Yes, but you know what? Very clever. Very clever. On a hot summer night in 1935, Jerry Siegel refined the Superman character into a version that is more recognizable today. Story begins on an unnamed doomed planet. A scientist placed his infant son into a rocket ship and launches it towards Earth. And as you probably know, that's all based on the Moses story, right? The alter ego of Clark Kent is presented as a mild-mannered reporter. Clark is infatuated with a beautiful co-worker named Lois. She adores Superman, but despises Clark for being a coward. Okay? And this is all self-insertion here, all right? I mean, if you look at Jerry Siegel, you can kind of see, a Clark Kent kind of vibe going on there, right? Joe Shuster penciled 4 weeks of newspaper strips for the new character. Joe outfitted Superman in a colorful circus strongman costume. Jerry suggested the swashbuckler cape and a symbol originally shaped like a shield. According to Jerry, the cape provided more action and movement. Joe said that he was inspired by silent films starring Douglas Fairbanks, especially Robin Hood. He always stands with his hands on his hips and his feet apart laughing, as if he doesn't take anything seriously. By 1936, the Superman chest emblem had changed from the shield to a triangle shape. Early sketches, Joe depicted Superman in a sleeveless leotard worn by wrestlers and strongmen of the era. Jerry and Joe correctly envisioned Superman becoming a marketing phenomenon. And again, it's the costume, all right? It's the costume, right? I just think Alice Cooper, Kiss, Guar, Motley Crue. Just think of all these rock bands that put themselves in costumes. Kids love costumes. So they tried to sell Superman for 6 years, finally published by National, aka DC. Editor Vin Sullivan chose it as the cover feature for Action Comics #1. Following year, Siegel and Shuster initiated the syndicated comic strip. Vin Sullivan wrote to Jerry Siegel about featuring blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm going to try to breeze through some of this because, who cares? They tried selling Superman for 6 years and they finally sold it to the people that had been working for. Okay. So there you go. Superman is an effing a-hole. I'll say it again. Superman is an effing a-hole. And we see here the same antagonisms. Lois just arguing and slapping people in the faces, and then, this thug mashing Clark Kent in the face, and Lois walking out of him because he's a spineless, unbearable coward. So again, this is Jerry Siegel's writing. It's just full, everything, every panel is conflict and antagonism. It's really hard to stomach after a while. And here it is again. So here's, we'll have one page where Clark Kent is, or one panel where Clark Kent is talking to Perry White, and he's on his way. And then this guy's whipping this woman with his belt, and, Superman throws him into the wall. Superman is an a-hole. It's not enough to just stop the guy from beating the woman. He's got to throw the guy into the wall. So again, constant. This is a shattered mind. Okay, this is a broken psyche writing these stories. Never mind this almost childlike kind of outsider art illustration. When you look at the stories, it's all violence of some manner or the other, whether it's verbal or physical. Named Clark Kent is a combination of movie actors Clark Gable and Kent Taylor. Okay. Both Jerry and Joe wore glasses, which Jerry believed gave an impression of meekness and mildness. Similar to actor Harold Lloyd in the silent films, Lloyd would start off being pushed around and bullied before turning into a fighting whirlwind. So this is all self-insert. This is all power fantasy. This is all compensatory fantasy. And again, I'm going to just try and go through all this stuff because it's not really the meat of what we're trying to get at here. Here we go again. Superman's an a-hole. He's he beats people up and then he makes fun of them. Can't help it. You'd laugh too if you could see your face. You're out. Okay. Hits him in the face with a wrench. Now, this is supposed to be Superman. That could kill the guy. Superman was not the godlike character that he later became. He's just, he's a strong man who can fly and so on. But he doesn't have the X-ray vision and all the rest of these ridiculous powers. He's just an a-hole. He's a total a-hole. Here he is here, breaks into the governor's mansion, You going to take me to the governor? No, I won't. You know, who would? I mean, it's like some guy busts open the door, take me to the governor. It's like, who would say, okay, go on upstairs, you know? And then he just carries him over his head. Superman is a total a-hole. Absolute a-hole. Straight up, no chaser. And here again, he's always just cracking wise and making fun of people who are fighting him. But of course, he's bulletproof. This is funny. Here, take these blankety-blank stocks. So people were using blankety-blank back then. That's very interesting. There is some weird kind of contemporary-sounding dialogue from time to time in these books. So again, not a heroic figure. He's just a bully. He's just a thug, who fights other thugs and other bullies. That's all he is. Now here, he gives somebody a date rape drug, pretty much. So this is a football player. Burke regains consciousness to discover himself a prisoner in his own apartment. What is Superman doing in his apartment, in his bedroom? What have you done to me? I can't move. You needn't worry. You're just rendered passive by a drug. So he drugs this guy and takes his identity, right? And goes to the locker room at the university. He's wearing a disguise. Hello, boys. And they're, the locker room looking like something out of a Village People video. There's a lot of unresolved sexual issues in these stories. As you can plainly see, why is he in this guy's bedroom drugging him? Just very, very weird and completely unheroic as well. So, what had happened is that Siegel and Shuster were drafted, and they just got a bunch of other people to do the book and do the strips and do all the rest of it. And you know what? Nobody noticed at all. As a matter of fact, the art got a lot better. I think one of the ghosts was Wayne Boring, and ghost means somebody who draws without credit. And Wayne Boring could draw Joe Shuster kind of looking material much better than Shuster himself. So this became a problem for the boys. They realized that they were very easily replaceable. Very easily replaceable. But Superman became a licensing bonanza with comic strip, obviously here. This is the original Siegel and Shuster material that they had done before selling the book. It was on the radio. Look at that. WOR, which still exists. WBZ, which still exists. Tell me if any of these other stations still exist in your area. Superman is on the radio. I used to listen to records of the old Superman radio show. And as I mentioned before, the Max Fleischer cartoons, which is the only iteration of Superman that I really enjoy. Okay, my son was obsessed with him when he was very young. Classic stuff. Much, much better than the comic books and comic strips. And then a serial starring Kirk Allen and Noel Neill. Okay. I believe Noel Neill played Lois Lane in the... Did she play Lois Lane in the TV show too as well? Yes, Superman movie serial. And then, of course, the television show with George Reeve. We're going to get to that when we get into the curse. You're not going to... Believe me, you're not going to believe the whole curse thing, because I did some digging. And wow. Yeah, the curse of Superman is going to be very, very shocking to some people, because it claimed quite a number of victims. World's Vilest. You know what this is. This is more... I swear to God, the more I look at, particularly the old DC comics, the creepier they get. How creepy are they? Well, look at that. This is this is World's Finest. This originally started as just a compendium where they just reprinted stories. It later became team up between Batman and Superman. But there's the Superman. I mean, come on. And then this, it's like, when I look at that image on the left, with the boy skinny dipping and like Superman and Batman giving themselves the most inappropriate looks. And then I look at this image on the left, all I can think of is it's like a kissing booth or something. It's just like so wrong. Oh my God. I hope this is just, I don't know. It's just, there's so much of this in these old comic books. It's really, really disturbing. And then this is just like, what is going on here? I mean, why is like a 12-year-old boy hanging around with these two muscle men? It's just wrong. I'm sorry. And the book on the right is from the 50s, so they had to put like the buxom girl in with the exposed thigh there, try to make it look less homoerotic. You be the judge of that. Oh, so now again, we talked about the occult. Now, Jerry Siegel, when we get into the curse of Superman, it kind of makes me wonder because Siegel seemed to know his occultism, at least his pop occultism. This is actually, I like this character far better than Superman, the Spectre. I was a big fan of this when I was a kid. Very grim, kind of gothic character who, in his 70s incarnation, would kill criminals in the most creative and disturbing ways. So the Spectre is a cop who's killed by criminals and meets God. So he's ascends into the clouds, the gates of eternity. It's not called God, it's called the Voice, but it's just basically God. And God sends him back to Earth to fulfill his mission of fighting evil, and gives him supernatural powers and so on. This is actually a really good strip. I really liked this when I was a kid. I mean, not this iteration here, but so it just kind of makes me wonder. This is very much in line with a lot of early 20th century kind of occult thinking, right? Then he created this character called the Star-Spangled Kid. And again, the young boy hanging around with the muscle man, which obviously you saw in any number of stories and titles, just weird and inappropriate. But anyway, Star-Spangled Kid, he must have been running out of ideas, because this is just basically Captain America and Bucky in reverse. Okay, Star-Spangled Kid, all right there. And again, just every panel is violence. Every panel is either arguing or physical violence. It just wears you down. It's exhausting. And here it is. And then also the sadistic mocking of, the people that they're beating up. I'll treat him gently as a baby. In that case, I sure hate to be your baby. It's just, never mind the fact that it's so wrong. It's just so wrong. This seems more wrong than Captain America and Bucky for some reason. Maybe because of just the actual sadism that you see and the unrelenting violence. And just look at those sadistic expressions as they kill people. It's just sociopathic. I truly believe that Jerry Siegel had sociopathic tendencies, all right? And then the art just started getting really, really weird too. Really strange, really disturbing. As you see these characters on the left and the right, it's almost like demonic character. It's surreal, but in a bad way. It's like nightmare surreal, but it's even more. It's like fever dream surreal. Again, I was just looking at this stuff, and it just was really getting to me. The psychopathy was really beamed into my head from looking at all this imagery. And then this weird character with the globe on its head. I really do believe that there was something very deeply wrong with this guy. Just really, really strange stories, really disturbing, really nightmarish, and psychedelic in a bad way. Okay, so that's part one. That's part one. I just wanted to cover all the history and so on. I'm going to, you know, I'll take a couple minutes if anybody wants to do whatever they got to do. If you want to get a drink, get something to eat, while I set up the next slide presentation. All right, we ready? We ready? We ready? Are we ready? Are we ready? Yeah, let me just give me just 1 second here. Okay. Now, we're going to get super, 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 super dark here. All right. I just telling you in advance, this is going to get really ugly. Really ugly. And I want to prepare everybody for that. We're going to be talking about some really dark stuff here. And you think, well, wait a minute, isn't this about Superman? Exactly. Exactly. Now, this panel here is from a comic book called Max Immortal by a guy named Rick Veitch, who did some very interesting kind of Watchmen before Watchmen, kind of deconstructing superheroes, but rather grotesque. He actually worked with Alan Moore on Swamp Thing, right? Also did a book called Brat Pack, which was kind of an exploration of the incredible inappropriateness of the boy sidekicks that we discussed, right? I mean, that's just so wrong. It hasn't gotten less wrong either for some reason. But he did this whole thing, and it was this is a grotesquely violent book. I do not recommend it, but I just wanted to grab a couple pages because they sort of speak to the story that we're going to tell here, all right? So this is obviously based on Siegel and Shuster, and how they're getting sort of ground down by the business and everything. There's a parallel story with this really, this is an incredibly unpleasant book that I do not recommend, but just needed this to sort of give us a little bit of a vibe of the Siegel and Shuster malaise, right? Spoiled by success. By the mid-1940s, Siegel and Shuster's control over their own creation was diminished. Siegel was not available to write stories as he served in World War II, and Shuster's output suffered from his increasingly worsening eyesight. Boy, that's got to be rough for an artist to go blind, right? To their horror, the duo found that they were easily replaceable, as Superman stories had been assigned by DC to other writers and artists without fans noticing any shift in tone or quality. Actually, they got a lot better. You can just go back and look at them. The stories became a lot less grotesque and psychotic. I think psychotic's better than psychopathic, right? Psychotic. The artwork just was vastly improved. Again, Shuster had a charm, but he was not a good artist. As DC took Superman into directions they didn't like without paying them, Siegel and Shuster decided to sue. Now, this is about the licensing and so on. Originally, now this is very important because there are a lot of counter narratives to their whole, oh, woe is us, we were victimized, and so on. They were very, very well paid by DC to do this book, as we'll see. Originally, they received support from publisher Max Gaines, but when he noticed that parts of their story didn't match, he no longer trusted them and pulled out of the deal. Interesting. So Max Gaines, who started All American and Educational Comics, later EC Comics, didn't trust them, thought that they were shining him on, which is very, very curious. And again, part of this counter narrative to this whole victimology that we see dealing with these guys. Tragic tale of Superman's Jewish creators told in graphic novel form. The Joe Shuster story by Julian Village and Thomas Campy portrays the children of Eastern European immigrants and how they nearly attained the wealth they dreamed of. Incorrect. They did attain the wealth that they dreamed of, and they blew it. Okay? They blew it. Period. All right? As we'll see. Now, thing people need to understand is this is how the business worked. When Siegel and Shuster created Superman in 1938, it was standard practice for creators to sell their work outright to publishers for a flat fee. It's still, Marvel DC is still standard practice, with no expectation of royalties or ongoing ownership. Modern licensing bonanzas were still a long way off and unheard of for comic books. There was no comic book characters in 1938 that were you had toys or t-shirts or anything like that. DC's purchase was a gamble. Superman was not an obvious hit and had been rejected by dozens of publishers before DC bought the rights. DC purchased the rights to Superman for $130, roughly equivalent to $2,800 in 28.25, a very tidy sum for two young creators during the Great Depression. Okay, DC paid Siegel and Shuster handsomely for ongoing work, roughly $800 per week at their peak, equivalent to $18,000 per week in 2025. So these guys were making major bank, far more than most average professionals, meaning lawyers and doctors, earned during the 1940s. All told, they made millions of dollars in today's currency, far more than other more prolific creators. A lot more than Jack Kirby, a lot more than Will Eisner, you name it. These guys were making money hand over fist. $18,000 per week? Oh my God, can you imagine that? So this whole story that DC ripped them off and they were, living in poverty and all this kind of stuff, they were very successful. They were making a lot of money and they blew it. So they tried to sue DC and they lost, okay? So then they tried to start a new character. This was going to be, they were going to show DC who the real moneymakers were. And they started this absolutely god-awful comic called Funny Man. Tragedy of Funny Man, how the creators of Superman tried to make lightning strike twice. Now, this is not Joe Shuster art. He might have done layouts, but this is one of his ghosts. I forget the guy's name, but he's very good. This is actually very good art. But the stories are just absolutely horrible. But it's all this, again, all these weird, taunting jokes constantly. And the same thing with the constant violence and the constant conflict. As we see, in 3 of the 5 panels on this page here, there's just something really wrong with Jerry Siegel. He could not tell a story that just wasn't filled with antagonism. I don't know what was wrong with that guy. The other problem, too, is that the character was based on Danny Kaye, and apparently some people noticed. Danny Kaye was a very popular comedian at the time. But again, the artwork is very good. But, this is the Joker. It's the Joker as a hero, basically. How creative is that? Like I said, I think Siegel's sort of idea factory kind of ran dry, or his idea well, and this is just the Joker as a hero, and with some Danny Kaye thrown in. Needless to say, this was a tremendous failure, an absolute flop, and they split up afterwards. Yeah, okay. Now we're going to get into the sicko scum effers, all right? There we go. Who are the sicko scum effers, or scum Fs, right? So, just so we're clear on this, comic books were made for kids, period. And usually kids, pre-adolescent kids. Children were reading comic books. You hear a lot of stupid excuses that adults coming back from the war were reading comic books. No, they weren't. Kids were, adolescents were, but mostly somewhere between the ages of 8 and 14 was the audience for comic books, period. So what do these publishers decide to do once the superheroes stop selling? This stuff, horror comics and crime comics, depictions that you would get an NC-17 rating for, okay? The most horrific graphic violence you can imagine. Story on the right is this, this baseball game being played with intestines for the base, for the diamond, and various organs for the bases and so on, and this head with the eyeball popping out for the ball. It was just unbelievable. See here, crime suspense stories, tremendous amount of violence against women. Women were more often than not the obvious targets of violence. So we see that this woman being strangled on this dinghy here on the left, and see this woman about to have her head axed off on Christmas of all things on the right here. Okay, these are all EC, which I mentioned before. I think the illustration on the left is Graham Ingalls. The illustration on the right is Johnny Craig. Again, these are being sold to young children, okay, 8 to 14. Some older, but just absolutely inexcusable to expose young children to this kind of carnage. And I don't care what any, these weird boomer comic dorks, oh, hey man, censorship. And it's like, shut the fuck up. Seriously. Have you ever, none of them have kids. None of them know how kids think or how kids respond. It's just shut up. Again, the story, exposed true crime cases, this woman being strangled, and then on the right, this cop being dissolved in acid, like his partner. Just absolute grotesque violence on an industrial scale. More EC, somebody getting his head blown off. And then on the right, this is an EC knockoff, but some criminal trying to dispose this woman, this beheaded woman in a manhole cover. Again, the level of violence, the intensity of violence that you see in some of these stories, you wouldn't even be able to get an R rating today. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And then this, the horror books with this just grotesque violence, extreme violence being marketed to young children. Unconscionable. Unconscionable. And, and you hear, hey man, they're burning the books and everything. Shut up. It's like, come on. Even Archie wasn't spared. Well, yeah, prove it. People were not naifs back then. They knew what they were looking at. They were looking at just disgusting exploitation made for a quick buck. And these publishers, like I said, as we've seen, a lot of them were just borderline gangsters, if not outright gangsters. And there's absolutely no excuse for this at all. So again, when I talked about this guy in my Wonder Woman presentation, which is a whole other story, this is Frederick Wertham. He was a German Jewish psychologist who fled Hitler, came to America, saw these comic books, and realized that this was creating preconditions for fascism in America with just these grotesquely violent stories. When I was working on, so I grew up hearing what, this guy was a horrible person and he was a censor and he was this, that, and the other thing. By the time I was done with Our Gods Wear Spandex, I was like, this guy is my hero. I mean, he put up with so much crap for telling the truth that these stories were not healthy for children at all, And, maybe society would have gone a little differently if people, paid a little bit more attention to him. They did, certainly. But, if people were a little bit more cognizant of what was appropriate and inappropriate for young people. So, again, this guy wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent, The Influence of Comic Books on Today's Youth. Now, he was doing clinical work, and he was hearing from all these kids who were involved in some pretty horrific crimes, as we're going to see shortly, that they were reading, these comic books that weren't the comic books that people might think today, when the comics code and censorship and everything kicked in. When it was just this disgusting free-for-all of violence and the rest of it. So this guy, like I said, became my hero. And he wasn't crazy about Superman. Now remember, the Superman that we saw was not the Superman that we saw in the 50s and 60s, which was very much a watered down character, was very much blanderized. We saw, as I showed you over and over again, that Superman was just an a-hole, a violent, taunting, sadistic a-hole. And I'll just read you this quickly. As our work went on, this is quoting from Wertham, as our work went on, we established the basic ingredients of the most numerous and widely read comic books: violence, sadism, and cruelty. The Superman philosophy, an offshoot of Nietzsche's Superman, who said, "When you go to women, don't forget the whip." We also found that what seemed at first a problem in child psychology had much wider implications. Why does our civilization give to the child not its best but its worst in paper and language and art and ideas? What is the social meaning of these supermen, superwomen, super lovers, super boys, super girls, super ducks, super mice, super magicians, super safecrackers? How did Nietzsche get into the nursery? Great line. How did Nietzsche get into the nursery? Nietzsche in the nursery, exactly. Now, this is Bill Gaines, publisher of EC Comics, who was a major speed freak. Congress pulled a lot of these publishers in, and as we see here, put a lot of these covers, these grotesque, disgusting covers, on a poster board there. And this was his testimony. His testimony before Congress basically brought the hammer down on the entire industry, because he was just such a mess. He was a sweaty, speedy mess. He was addicted to meth that he started taking for diet pills, but it was just an absolute disaster. As we see, this is another panel from Max Immortal. Oh, Christ, oh, S. Joe, are you okay? This damn circus is making us look like pornographers. I don't know if the industry can survive this. What are we going to do for work? So this is obviously a comic strip, but this was very much what was happening. People saw Bill Gaines on television make an absolute disgrace of himself and realized that it was all over. And the comic industry took a major hit for a number of years. Now, Gaines, since he was a speed freak and was not entirely rational, responded to Wortham with this, "Are you a red dupe?" in this whole cartoon about communists. It's, the people coming after us are communists. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, this didn't make him any friends either. This was a terrible mistake on his part and cost him an enormous amount of money. Enormous amount of money, by taunting Congress and people like Wortham. The group most anxious to destroy comics are the communists. We're serious, no kidding. And just take some story from the Daily Worker. Like that's representative of anything, whatever. Like all of the Communist International was worried about comic books. But it also mentions Gershon Legman, a person who we're going to talk about shortly, was one of Wortham's researchers. I'm not even going to read this. This is just speed freak delusions. This is a terrible decision on his part, and pretty much destroyed his business. And this is a comic book depiction. So the senator, I think it was Estes Kefauver, was wondering why he thought it was appropriate to sell, a woman's severed head on a cover of Children's Entertainment. And this is almost quoting verbatim. It could have been worse. We could have angled the head to show the neck bleeding or make her tongue hanging out, things like that. And can you tell us why you positioned the man's hand holding the axe in a phallic manner so close to his genital area? And it was an absolute blowout that put a lot of companies out of business and a lot of artists, and it just created a tremendous amount of problems. Rightly so. I mean, these people all needed to be shut down, as far as I'm concerned. First Amendment free expression, that's fine. When you're selling things that are marketed to children, you need to take responsibility for that. And here, I love this picture. There is Bill Gaines after his, after it all came crashing down on his head, and he's just like, oh, I really dropped the plate. But then, of course, he starts Mad Magazine, which, and he was apparently a very good guy. I mean, he paid his artists very well. He paid his writers and artists very well. I mean, he was not one of these typical publishers. He was a decent guy, but he was also he was a speed freak. He was a drug addict, and he had no judgment. People don't really understand how many problems, particularly through the 20th century, can really be chalked up to amphetamine psychosis. Anyway, Gershon Legman published Love and Death, an attack on sexual censorship, arguing that American culture was permissive of graphic violence in proportion to and as a consequence of its repression of the erotic. The book also included a chapter that attacked contemporary pre-code comic books as harmful for children for their celebration of violence, foreshadowing the later crusade against the comic industry dominated by Frederick Wertham. Legman was in many ways a radical. He was a libertine, really, but never identified with the movements of its time, decrying the sexual revolution, for example, in the Fake Revolt in 1967, and such topics as women's liberation, rock and roll, and the psychedelic movement's use of mind-altering substances. So he's like an old-style bohemian, right? Doesn't really dig all the hippie stuff. He said this about Superman: in the hand of Superman, private justice takes over. Legal process is completely discounted and contemptuously bypassed. No trial is necessary. No stupid policemen hog all the fun. Fist crashing into faces become the court of highest appeal. And if Superman himself does not shed blood, few of his imitators are quite so careful. The question is not whether Superman flies because children object to the law of gravity, or because the flying dream is disguised and therefore allowable eroticism. The question is what has become of the law and order that the Supermen are supposedly withholding. So again, he's looking at these stories that we looked at where it's just constant violence and sadistic violence, as we saw in the Siegel and Shuster Superman. In same ability to transcend all human law and be honored for it instead of punished that makes the Superman formula so successful. Crime comics are generally frowned upon because of the obvious insincerity of their last page exhortations to law and order. And that's like Jerry Springer, right? At the last minute. Oh, be good to yourself, whatever. And so Superman reverses the formula. He takes the crime for granted and then spends 30 pages violently avenging it. He can see through brick walls. He can stop the sun in its orbit like a second Joshua. All this godlike power, he focuses on some two-bit criminal or crackpot, as we saw, who hasn't even pulled the trigger yet, but is only threatening to. Giant the Jack Killer. I love that. Giant the Jack Killer. That's great. And of course, all the Superman's violence being on the side of right, there is no necessity. And he kind of picked on this, the really important homosexuality of the Superman theme, as deep in the hub of the formula as the clothes and kisses are at the periphery, is in the lynching pattern itself and the weak and fearful righteousness with which it achieves its wrong. No matter how bad criminals or even crime comics may be, in identifying himself with them, the child does consummate his Oedipal dream of strength. The criminal does not break through his environment. The Supermen, the super sleuths do not. They align themselves always on the side of law, order, authority, the father, and accept their power passively from a bearded above. They are not competing for the bit. I'm not going to get into this. It's like he's getting into like Wild Bill Hickok, our own homosexual hero, when men were men, with his long silk stockings and lesbian sidekick Calamity Jane. I mean, this guy is like. He's really digging into it. He's really digging into the subtext. But in this case, he's right about Superman, for sure. And also, the violence against women. And look at that cover, how it, we almost see the skin exposed there. It's a very nice drawing, though. The moon rockets with the red tips to which interplanetary women captives must be bound. This is standing. He's talking about all the phallic symbol, the snakes, the whips, the endless revolvers and automatics aimed from and at the groin. We saw that, if not at the buttocks. The absolute nadir of indefensible vulgarity, the habitual desecration of women in wedding gowns, now repeated on the cover of Clairvoyant Comics #3, where the bride is socked on the chin with the butt of a gun, thrown in the mud in her white tully gown. This is like brutal, We kind of take it for granted because it's very stylized, right? But this is a woman being hit in the face by a large man with a gun butt, which would break her jaw. It's just, again, the violence against women in so many of these stories is just relentless. As we see here, Siegel and Shuster, Spy. Do you, Philip Marsden, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Not today, you won't. Up with your hands. If anyone moves, I'll put a bullet in her brain. You know, he's got the wife and or the bride. You know, you get one panel of setup, and then it's straight to the violence. All right, here we go, folks. Horror comes home. Joe Shuster was having a really rough go of it. He was losing his eyesight. He lost a lawsuit. Joe Shuster at one time worked for a delivery service and had to deliver something to a company in the same building as DC offices. A DC employee saw him in the hallway and noticed he was wearing shabby clothes. Word spread throughout the DC staff very quickly about the fate of Superman's co-creator. The next day, DC asked him to come in. Shuster had his hopes up that they might have some pity for him and work out a settlement. Instead, he was given $100, told to buy an overcoat, and not to come around the building again. Wow. That is cold. That is cold. Cold. You know, but like I said, these guys were doing well for themselves, and they should have known, should have known a good thing when they had it. Look at all their contemporaries. Now, since he needed work, talk about Knights of Horror. Shuster was also the anonymous illustrator for Knights of Horror, an underground sadomasochistic fetish paperback book series. The Knights of Horror series was seized and banned in the state of New York, and the case eventually went to the Supreme Court. However, the book's artist was never identified at the time. In 2004, Gerard Jones, convicted pedophile, revealed that Shuster had drawn the books. The claim was backed up in 2009 by comics historian Craig Yo. You know, again, this is really grotesque stuff here. Sadistic violence against naked or partially undressed women over and over again, as we'll see. So this is the co-creator of Superman, people, drawing sadomasochistic pornography. Okay. Now I don't know if it was ever identified who wrote this, but I wonder if he wrote it as well. Again, so this is really, really brutal. Knights of Horror, Eternal Bondage. He was not averse to having his plaything become the property of the other seamen. Yeah. Double entendre there, right? Knights of Horror had a small circulation, allegedly was only available in Times Square adult bookstores. The series lasted 16 issues. Each issue depicted sexual acts, bondage, and torture that ranged from women whipping men to men spanking women to women tying up women, and a lot more, as we'll see. It was by no means a professional publication. In fact, the text of each issue was not typeset or laid out, but simply looked as if it was made using a typewriter and then photocopied. Stories included text descriptions of sexual discipline and torture, mind control through drugs and hypnosis, and white slavery, with titles like The Strange Loves of Alice, Devil's Formula, Slaves of Dorado, Slave Camp, and Flesh Merchants. The incredible true story of Joe Shuster's Knights of Horror by Joe Sergi. Sexual discipline and torture, mind control through drugs and hypnosis. What was going on at the same time, folks? What was going on in the early 50s? All right, what was going on? Makes you wonder. So we see here this woman being held, holding on to these rings. She's got this weight around her waist, and below her is death by impalement. And we see this grinning sadist there. This is psychotic, psychopathic, sociopathic. This is disgusting. This isn't like play S&M. This isn't like BDSM play. This is murder. This is like True Detective magazine kind of stuff, murder. We see the nipples there. Yeah, this is really, really horrific. And then, you know, there's obviously a range here. The woman's kissing the feet. Make note of that, because that's going to show up again later. And this guy looks like Al Capone's about to whip her. And again here, the cat o' nine tails, and the woman bent over the bar there. This doesn't look, again, this does not look like play. This looks like murder. These are all murderous scenarios. These women are all being murdered, okay? I mean, straight up. So we see here again, the weight, and this guy has an oar, and she's about to be impaled. She's crying. This is really, really horrific, dark stuff here. All right. Again, the drawing style is kind of almost childish in some ways, outsider art. It's not sophisticated in its delineation, but it's showing a woman about to be murdered. All right. Again, another woman about to be murdered. This woman being whipped here. And notice that he can't resist putting Jimmy Olsen in there, right? This woman there. And there's Clark Kent and Lois Lane, in a way. And then this woman chained to the ceiling, suspended in midair, and this guy with these spiked gloves. This is horrible, sadistic crap, all right? This is disgusting. But, NPR thought it was sexy. The sexy secret identity of Superman's creator. I mean, look at that image on the right. There's nothing sexy about that. That is torture. These are all images of torture and murder, okay? There's nothing sexy about it, But people's moral compasses have been so broken, particularly on the left, that it's sexy. It's not sexy. And we talked about quite a bit in Wonder Woman with the bondage. I mean, that is obviously more stylized, more play. And then also on the right, we see, more stylized bondage, more sexual play, as opposed to bloody murder like that, okay? And this is torture. This is medieval torture. And, of course, Craig Yo, who I have some issues with. I've known him for a long time, but he's, one of these types. Secret Identity, the fetish art of Joe Shuster, and this Superman being whipped by Lois Lane. There's a lot of lesbianism in these stories, as you would expect. There's sort of the femme fatale and the whipping and so on. So there is a range, to more mild types of beatings and whippings to murder scenarios. All right. Okay. Now, this had an effect in the real world. Okay. Definitely had an effect in the real world. I mean, among other influences. The life in the thrill kill cult. I don't know how many people here know about the Brooklyn thrill kill cult. But we're about to discuss that right now. The thrill kill cult, okay? The Brooklyn Thrill Killers were a group of teenage boys who were convicted of killing one man and accused of killing another, one by drowning, one by beating, and committed acts of assault and torture against several other people in Brooklyn, a borough of New York. During the summer of 1954, the case attracted considerable media attention. It also fueled a controversy over comic books, accused at the time of causing sexual perversion and juvenile delinquency. 4 members of the gang were teenagers who belonged to Brooklyn's Jewish community: Jack Koslow, 18, Marvin Mittman, 17, Jerome Lieberman, 17, and Robert Trachtenberg, 15. Jewish neo-Nazis, by the way, they identified as neo-Nazis, as we'll see. Very strange. 4 boys admitted to a litany of offenses, which included pouring gasoline over a man and setting him alight, and horsewhipping 2 young women in a public park, which we'll see they got the inspiration for that from that Joe Shuster comic book. The nickname Thrill Killers was given to them after Kings County District Attorney commented that the boys, who never robbed any of their victims, had no reason except the thrill they got. teen thrill killers seized, 4 held in wanton slayings and beatings. Okay. Jack Kozlow, the boy Hitler of Flatbush Avenue. See him wearing a Hitler mustache there. Jack Kozlow, the leader of the teen gang, was a teenager with a Hitler mustache and a near-genius IQ who believed that vagrants like Mentor, one of the people that he murdered, were parasites on society. His second in command was Marvin Mittman, a musician who played the accordion, who liked to use bums for punching bags to see how hard he could hit them. All right. And there is one of their victims. Okay, the boys, so we can see there. Surrounded by cops and all these other people. Body pulled out of the water that they threw into the river. The 4 boys roamed the streets of Brooklyn, assaulting girls and beating up vagrants. Kozlow, who read comic books, saw himself as a crime-fighting hero, exactly as Gershon Legman talked about and as Wortham warned about. Believed his actions would help the police restore law and order. Mittman later commented that their goal had been to clean the streets of bums. The first man killed by the gang was a homeless alcoholic named Reinhold Eriksson, who they kicked and punched to death. Terrific. Their second victim was Willard Mentor, a 34-year-old black man. Kozlow and Mittman found Mentor as he was sleeping on a bench after a drinking binge. They beat him and threw him in the East River, where he drowned. The 4 gang members were arrested shortly after his murder. After their arrest, Mittman and Kozlow were belligerent and bragged that murdering Mentor had been a supreme adventure. Kozlow stated that he considered vagrants to be social parasites. All right. Okay. Frederick Wortham said that the gang's leader had read the books, meaning the Joe Shuster books that we just looked at, those torture and murder books, and that they were responsible for his crimes. Wortham testified, Kozlow fancied himself a Superman. He graduated from crime and Superman comic books, which he read in his childhood. He became steeped in horror comics, his mind becoming filled with all the thrill of violence, murder, and cruelty described in them. In addition, Kozlow was an addict of the type of pornography horror literature which is closely allied to comic books, although in a different format. He told me he had read every volume of Nights of Horror and had been fascinated and emotionally overwhelmed by them. And one of the girls who they beat, he made kiss his feet, just as we saw in one of those illustrations. So, kind of makes me wonder, it's like there was definitely a time, I guess we've all become numb to violence. There was definitely a time when people would act out violence that they saw on TV or in movies and comic books. And that seemed to ebb, I guess maybe in the 90s. I mean, it never went away, but it certainly seemed to ebb. So these murders, since this Kozlow gentleman here, or boy, really, was the leader of this gang of thrill killers, was addicted to Nights of Horror, said he had been fascinated and emotionally overwhelmed by them. Do you see what I'm talking about? About psychic shattering, the shattering of psyches. Shuster and Siegel were broken men. They were broken up inside. And their work started to reflect that. I mean, I would argue that it had always reflected that. And we're still not done with Siegel yet. Shuster, I believe this was one of the last major projects he had done before he couldn't draw anymore. It's really a shame that this is the last bow, as you say. But again, it's just absolutely appalling to me that people like Craig Yo think that this is something to celebrate. Those images are horrific. All right, those are images of murder by torture of women. How is that sexy? It's not. unless you are a psychopath. Period. 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 All right? No excuses. If you think that is sexy, you belong in prison, really, or in a mental institution. Here are some more images of Nights of Horror. Woman on the Catherine wheel. Again, another image of murder. These women with the whips and so on. There you go. Now, after it came out about the thrill killers, a bench trial was held where the police testified that the booklets had been displayed in defendants' stores. A number of porno shops were, busted for this, and that they had purchased a number of copies from the various defendants. The cops did. The publications themselves were also introduced in evidence. Judge Matthew Levy, very famous judge, who presided over the case, provided a thorough description of the books. Nights of Horror is no haphazard title. Perverted sexual acts and macabre tortures of the human body are repeatedly depicted. The books contain numbers of acts of males torturing females and some vice versa, by most ingenious means, which the court describes in detail. Their volumes expressed a philosophy of man's omnipotent physical power over the female of the species. On occasion, the young woman is said to have gained satisfaction from the brutal beatings and horrible tortures. And he goes on. And just says that there's absolutely, there's no plot line, there's no moral, there's just, all it is just depictions of sadism. And murder and torture. Again, folks, this is the co-creator of Superman, right there. Images of torture, images of murder. If that woman lets go of those rings, she's going to be impaled. Unbelievable. I hate this stuff with a passion that I cannot even begin to communicate. I can't even begin to tell you how much I hate this stuff. All right. That's part two. So we see that the co-creator of Superman ended his career drawing torture porn. All right. Now, do you understand why I say that these are shattered men? Okay? Shattered men. There's any number of things that this guy could have done. They said, he was desperate for money. Where's the evidence of that? Nobody even knew that he drew these pictures until a few years ago. Where's the evidence that he was somehow, had no other choice than to draw these images of murder and torture? Where's the evidence of that? There's none. There's absolutely none. It's all assumption. It's all assumption. Broken men do broken things. All right, we're going to take another short break, and then we'll get into part 3 and part 4. Let's see. Let me just. Okay. I'll try to breeze through these things a little bit quicker. I know I'm keeping you guys a long time, but again, I think this is really important. We need to understand. See, here's the thing. I don't believe that. I believe I believe in multi-layers of communication, that verbal communication is just the lowest frequency of our interactions, right? There are so many other layers of communication. So the thinking that would create Nights of Horror is already embedded in Joe Shuster's mind for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know enough about him. I don't know what inspired that. I don't know what inspired. Well, I have a bit more of an idea with Shuster, with Seagel, which we'll get into. But why his stories are just constant antagonism, just never-ending violence and dispute, right? Now, the thing is that their creative DNA, all right, is embedded into Superman, which is embedded into our culture, okay? All right? It might get a little metaphysical for some people, but I really do believe that these are men who are shattered. Stephen King, great example. Now, when you start digging into Stephen King, you understand how shattered he is, okay? That he is a shattered man. And I think that's why he's such a workaholic. You know, it's a compulsion. He can't enjoy anything else. He might not even enjoy writing. He might just be totally compelled to do so. But he's clearly a shattered man, okay? And that's why there's just so much dodgy nonsense in his work. And, you know, and I mentioned Gene Roddenberry, you know? You've probably all seen that video going around on social media about Gene Roddenberry talking about like little girls. And I mean, it's just the most disgusting thing you'll ever hear. But for those of us who are familiar with his history, we're not surprised, you know? I mean, maybe I'm a little surprised that, you know, it took that route, but he was a disgusting pervert, you know? Every actress that you saw, or not every, but it's like half the actresses you see on Star Trek had to sleep with him to get their jobs. I mean, he was Mr. Casting Couch. Nichelle Nichols, perfect example. Majel Barrett was his mistress. I mean, Grace Lee Whitney, and that gets a little dark too. But people will talk about these stories like they're admirable, right? Can you separate the art from the artist? Well, maybe, but not if it gets really ugly, right? Not if they're shattered. Not if they're shattered psyches. You cannot separate the art from the artist. And the art is embedded into our cultural DNA, okay? And that's why I felt, you know, even when I was a kid, I just felt there was something wrong with Superman. There was something that was missing. There was something that wasn't being said, all right? I just was uncomfortable with the character for some reason. And, you know, I read all kinds of comic books, you know, from the sublime to the grotesque. And there was just something about that character that I'm just like, there's something wrong there, right? And now, like, that's the big movie this weekend. I mean, we'll see how much of an impact. I don't think it will really have much of an impact past people just going to see it for a good time, get into some air conditioning, right? But there's something wrong. It's just something wrong with that character. And now, you know, it's like something wrong with Star Trek, you know? So much of it. So much of it. And maybe, you know, it's kind of like, it's not a problem in small doses, right? But the problem is when it stops being entertainment and becomes obsession. Listen, I know about a lot of this Japanese stuff too, right? I mean, even Nights of Horror is mild compared to that. But Japan is also a dying society, a literally dying society. And that is the real issue here, okay? Is that this stuff is demoralizing. It demoralizes us. And demoralizing leads to decadence, which leads to, is decay. Decadence means to decay, to rot, right? Corruption means to rot, all right? By immersing ourselves too much in the power fantasies of shattered psyches, which we've done for past almost 20 years now, right? Since Batman Begins, right? It has not had a good effect on our society. Believe me. Listen, I wrote the book on this stuff, but when I wrote Our Gods Wear Spandex, the one problem that I kept coming up against is like, where is this going? Where is this leading us? I couldn't figure that out because I couldn't see the future yet. But now that I can see the future, I understand that geek culture and superheroes and all this kind of stuff, listen, a little bit, there's nothing wrong with a little escapism. But by just completely burying our psyches in the fantasies of broken minds, it breaks your mind, or it breaks part of your mind, or it cracks it. And we are a society of shattered psyches, right? And it's almost like this is a contagion, right? Listen, there's nothing wrong with going to see the Superman movie, whatever, have a good time at the movies, right? It's like you can, a little drink now and then, it's not going to hurt you, right? But the problem is when it becomes an addiction, when we become addicted to shattered psyches. All right. So a lot of stuff we're gonna do now is gonna be a lot of visual stuff. So hopefully we can breeze through this a little bit quicker. Like I said, I really appreciate your patience, and I hope I'm not outwearing my welcome. All right, so let's get into the next part of our story. Give me a second here. I just want to take a drink. Here we go. So what had happened is that Siegel and Shuster had sued DC, but DC had not obtained the rights to Superboy properly, so they won $94,000. Again, not chump change. I'm sure a lot of it went to the lawyers, but that was no small amount of money in the 50s or early 50s, late 40s, believe me. But by the late 50s, Jerry Siegel and his family were broke. Their economic status had gotten so bad that Siegel's wife Joanne had visited Jack Leibowitz at DC and told them how bad things were. She asked him, "Do you really want to see in the newspaper creator of Superman starves to death?" Leibowitz did not, so DC gave Siegel some writing assignments between 1958 and 1966, which was incredibly magnanimous of them. Oh, I'm having some trouble talking tonight. That was very generous of them. They didn't have to do that because he sued them. And he sued them because he wanted to break his contract. But it was under certain conditions. Jerry would receive no credit or special privileges for his work. Okay. But he had it. He had work. And believe me, in the late 50s, that was a pretty rough time to be in the comic book business. Believe me. All right, let's go. So this is Superboy, first issue of Superboy. And, whatever, the boys. I mean, I don't want to look too much of this kind of thing through a modern lens because no matter what we know about Jerry Siegel, I mean, there's still, this was still kind of common parlance at the time, and again, these are being marketed to children that age, so it's entirely appropriate. Also did the Legion of Superheroes, which was created by Otto Binder. Otto Binder, who very interesting guy we should talk about sometime. Wrote the original I, Robot. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, but anyway, this is Siegel with, like, everything is traitors and betrayal and argument. I mean, so that's the legion of super traitors, and we see these mind controlling brains. Why are the legion all turning on Superboy? Well, they're controlled by these big brained objects here. Similar to what we saw in Star Trek, right? And then this whole trope that we see over and over again with these everybody sort of looking through each other's clothing. I don't know what to make of that, but whatever. It is what it is. You see that big Comics Code Authority approval. That happened after the whole situation with Wortham came down. And again, the traitors, the treason, Superboy and the 5 Legion traitors. So he's obviously nursing some resentments that are being expressed in his stories. This issue on the right here, I think, is funny. Superboy's greatest hoax. Oh, my best friend Superboy is dead from virus X. The virus is a hoax. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. How about that, huh? And then, this kind of thing. These stories in the 50s and 60s comics, particularly in DC, are just, this is something really, really odd about them and kind of off-putting, because they had so many limitations of what they could write about that they had to start writing like all these bizarre science fiction stories, like Batman fighting, robot dinosaurs and stuff. But then there's the whole spanking thing too. Again, there's definitely some unresolved sexual issues with this stuff. These men spanking Superboy, whatever. But of course, there's Batman and Robin, waking up in the same bed and getting a good spanking for his birthday. Happy birthday, Dick. That's just so wrong. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be that guy, but it's just wrong. Also, Super Baby. We see Super Baby. I don't want to read too much into this kind of stuff. It's just too creepy. But again, a lot of this betrayal and all these kind of feelings. I mean, Siegel was clearly nursing some issues. Superdog's mean master, Crypto the Superdog, and his mean master. I mean, just a lot of anger and hostility and conflict and resentment in these very bland and otherwise inert looking stories. And then the Bizarro world. See, this is when I really started to think that, he was really starting to just lose his mind. This whole Bizarro world, this whole inverse kind of thing. And if you're familiar with this character, you know what I'm talking about. I just kind of feel like this is not the creation of a healthy mind. But they became very popular. It's creative in a way. I know he wrote the original story. I don't know if he actually created the characters. Sometimes the editors would create the characters, so I'm not exactly sure. Alistair Luthor. Here we go. Alistair Luthor. So, one thing I wrote about in our Gods Wear Spandex is that I couldn't help thinking that Lex Luthor is inspired by Alexander Crowley, a.k.a. Aleister Crowley. Particularly by his appearance, right? But here is Superboy's first duel with Luthor, right? And this, again, the kind of sub-rosa subtext in this is rather interesting. So This is the first time Superboy meets Lex Luthor. Do you like surprises? Follow me. I wonder what he's going to show me. And he's got this shrine to Superboy, which is kind of weird. I've hero worshipped you for years. To me, you're the greatest boy in the world. You know, rock with Superboy's first imprint on it. Gerda was bent by Superboy around an escaping giant gorilla and all these pictures of Superboy. Golly, I'm really touched. What are all these scientific lab gadgets doing here? I'm a farm boy now, Superboy, but my secret ambition is to become the world's greatest scientist. I'd like to become as famous as you. And what are you doing with all that abandoned junk? You know, and then Superboy builds him like a nice modern laboratory out of junk in seconds because he's Superboy. I've given you rare chemicals, some still unknown, which I borrowed out of the ground at super speed. Also, I transferred everything here from your old lab. Boy, what a pal. One word of caution, be careful with those unknown chemicals. So it's just that, you know, it's a big love fest, mutual love in here. Just couldn't be happier. Gee, I never dreamed that the boy of steel would, I've always admired so much, would be a buddy of mine someday. So what do? He starts creating a homunculus. He's got all these chemicals that Superboy created for him, and discovering the very secret of life itself. It's alive, and my formula created it out of chemicals. It's crude protoplasm, but who knows what stupendous experiment this may lead to. So after weeks of feverish experimentation, he creates a homunculus. Laboratory, whatever. I'm getting tired of reading all this stuff. So you see he's got the homunculus on the left there, homunculus. Now he wants to invent a kryptonite antidote for Superboy. He's just all about Superboy. Get some kryptonite out of the quicksand, and you know, he's gonna use it for all these things. But let's talk about the homunculus for a moment here. This is from A History of Magic, Witchcraft, and Occultism by W.B. Crow. Alchemy had three main objects: the transmutation of base metals into gold, or the conversion of abundant, relatively useless material into rare, useful substances, as we saw when Superman or Superboy created a laboratory out of junk; prolongation of life indefinitely, or more generally, the cure of all disease and senility. The third main object of alchemy, the creation of a human being from non-living chemical materials, such as an artificial man being called the android or homunculus. Secret document, this is the 9th degree, secret document De Homunculus, in which Crowley relates sex magic secrets in the fabrication of the magical child described previously in this series and conflated with the fabrication of the elixir of life as the effluvia of ritualized sexuality. Don't ask what the effluvia of ritual sexuality is, because it's you don't want to know. In prescribed circumstances, often fabricating an astral and magical being to carry to fruition the desired will of the magician, or in more general terms, to create living things from non-living. Now, if you sort of look at this relationship between these two, wonder if there's some effluvia being created off camera there. Anyway, so here he is. He's all getting all over it here. He's gonna cure kryptonite and create this homunculus and all the rest of it. But now this is very interesting too. This is 1960, and we're gonna. If this reminds you of anything, please let me know. So he's got the kryptonite antidote, chemical flask overturns. He knocks it over. Fumes, smoke, radiation. Help, Superboy, help. Luthor, I'll extinguish the blaze with a mighty super puff of breath. Yes, he'll blow it out. Except for it also makes Luthor lose all his hair. You rat, your puff of super breath blew an acid bottle against the antidote bottle. They broke, and blah, 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 blah. Stories are just so strange. And again, it's like few panels of harmony, and then just back to the conflict and all the rest of it. Jealous of my genius, And he starts freaking out, Superboy just saved his life, but he's mad because he lost his hair, which is just like the strangest plot device here. I just don't understand. This is just bizarre. Bizarre. So he's going to build a homunculus to get revenge on Superboy and all the rest of it. I hate him. I hate him. How could I ever hero worship that super rat? I'll destroy every picture, every trophy of him. Again, so there's the harmony and the comedy and then the destruction again. And there's this weird crush that Lex Luthor has on Superboy. Okay. Now, lab fire explosion. Yes, Jack Parsons was attempting to create a homunculus is a theory surrounding his death stemming from his involvement in occult practices in the nature of a lab explosion that killed him. Some, including his widow, believed he was experimenting with a magical creation that is considered a fringe theory, and the chemicals found with him are consistent with known rocket fuel research. So, Marjorie Cameron believed he was trying to create a homunculus out of those same chemicals. Blast, 37 dies of injuries. I think that was sabotage, by the way, but, whatever. And there's the grief-stricken widow, Marjorie Cameron. Yes, and then the mother who committed suicide. The mystic symbols, Kabbalistic symbols on the lid of the box containing private papers of John Whiteside Parsons, the explosive expert who was killed in an explosion. Friends said symbols point to his flair for mysticism, which fascinated him as much as deadly explosives, as it did with Marjorie Cameron. Yeah, so very interesting. So 8 years after Parsons, and it makes me think, see, this is why I'm starting to think, we're going to get into the curse in a few minutes, but really starting to think that Jerry Siegel kind of knew his occultism, because this whole thing seems very much like it is based on Jack Parsons, right? He's creating the homunculus, and then he has this lab explosion and all the rest of it. So maybe he read it in a book, pop occultism book, maybe read it in a Pulp magazine. There are any number of places he could have read about this, and of course it made the news and everything, but really makes me wonder if this was all based on Parsons, which is very interesting since, as I said before, I do believe that Lex Luthor was originally based on Aleister Crowley. Okay? So there we go. There we go, folks. Jimmy Olsen. Now, Jimmy Olsen, when he first appears, is a very, very young boy. Looks to be about 12 at the most. There's Lois. Again, this drawing is very crude, but it has its charm. But then they give him his own comic. Jimmy Olsen has his own comic, and that particular cover looks reminds me very much of Ace and Gary. If you remember Ace and Gary from Saturday Night Live, appropriately. And again, a lot of these stories are just, I don't know, they're just a little strange. Well, I'm just going to leave it at that. This made me laugh. Jimmy Olsen on his bike looking for all the world like Pee Wee Herman, which is kind of amusing. And then meeting this alien. And again, all these stories just have very strange subtext that you can see for yourself. And then, speaking of which, for some reason, there are a number of stories where Jimmy Olsen dressed in drag and looks for all the world like Superman's original girlfriend, Lana Lang, which kind of makes you wonder. Miss Jimmy Olsen. And then this whole story with these mobsters. This reminds me of like Performance or something out of a British gangster movie. They're fighting over the drag queen. And then this weird subtext with the softball player is jealous. I don't know. It's just a minefield of Freudian insanity. Now this is funny. Hey, it just hit me. Your throat. You've got an Adam's apple. No dame has an Adam's apple. Only a man. You're a fake. And there's the monkey with a baseball bat who's about to defend Jimmy. And it's again, these stories are just all very... I mean, even when they're not explicitly about this kind of stuff, they're all just... The subtext is all very creepy. Leslie Lowe, girl reporter. You know, even Clark Kent is hitting on her. Jimmy Olsen in disguise. Makes a very convincing woman, doesn't he? And then this story, which is just insane. Jimmy Olsen dress up in drag to go to the Jimmy Olsen. So there's a Jimmy Olsen fan club that he shows up in drag. It's like, just imagine where that ends up in like a porno movie. All right. I mean, this, come on. It's just, that's just, I don't even want to know what's going on there. He's showing off a little leg to his fan club, and Jimmy Olsen fan club. He shows up in drag. It's like, what is the under what is the undertone here? What are they trying to say here? Very weird. And then he sprays him in the mouth with this kind of thing, and it's just, that just seems like a standard for something. And then all the boys dress up. They dye their hair red, and this brown substance gives them freckles. Don't you want to look like Jimmy Olsen as much as possible? It's, again, Freud would have a field day with this stuff. And then he reveals himself to be Jimmy Olsen. Makes Tommy Todd that, like, what is this story about? This is psychotic. Never mind the fact that it's like a weird kind of porno movie setup. It's just insane. And so many of these stories are insane. Where we're going here. Oh, yes. So he's working for DC, and he decides to sue them again. When the time came for a copyright renewal, Siegel's own lawyers ignored his case and wouldn't return his calls. They didn't even want to get involved in this. Prior to the copyright challenge, Siegel knew he'd be fired again, so he made sure he had other work to fall back on. Not surprisingly, DC fired Siegel for trying to get copyright ownership of Superman again. Siegel again fell into hard financial times after this second dismissal, as he was unable to find regular writing work. For a period of 7 years, he worked as a typist in the mailroom for the Los Angeles Public Utilities Commission, later telling an employee newsletter, "With all the troubles and prolonged litigation I have had over, I just wanted to hide out." But he still did get some writing. Nature Boy, there we go. This is so he actually, I'm sorry, this is before he went back to DC. So before he went back to DC, he works for Charlton, which is like the last stop on the Has-Been Express. I mean, this is where you go when you just can't get work anywhere else. They hire him to do, recreations of Superboy and Superman. He does Nature Boy here, with all this phallic insanity here. But Nature Boy, so it's based on a Nat King Cole song. This is a very interesting backstory. It's written by this guy, Eden Abez, who was said to be the first hippie, like the first true hippie. He wrote this song called Nature Boy for Nat King Cole, but he based it on who? On the Wandervogel. Nature Boy was written in honor of the Wandervogel, a German youth movement that originated in the late 19th century, emphasizing a return to nature and rejecting the perceived constraints of urban industrial society. They engage in hiking, camping, and other outdoor activities, seeking a more authentic and fulfilling life away from the pressures of modern civilization. The movement began in Berlin around 1896. Initially composed of school children and students from middle-class backgrounds, Wandervogel members valued nature, freedom, and self-discovery, rejecting what they saw as the materialistic and restrictive aspects of German society at the time. So it goes to being a Nat King Cole song to being a Jerry Siegel comic book. Now, when we talk about the DNA involved in this, so here's the original Wandervogel, and look at the runes there. That's very interesting. But The Wandervogel took a very, very dark turn, folks. A very, very dark turn. After the First World War, I mean, kind of almost like the Thrill Kill cult here. After the First World War, the Wandervogel split into different groups and factions, ranging from the proto-hippies of the Ascana Commune to the proto-fascist White Knights. After the Great Crash of 1929, the financial crash, youths were disproportionately hit. 500,000 adolescents wandered around the country in hopeless vagabondage. People forget that during the Great Depression, I mean, parents couldn't feed their kids, so the kids just left. The kids just went wandering around the country. It was a very, very dark time. Many adolescents crossed the boundary into outright criminality. One of the bizarre groupings was discovered by journalist Christine Fournier in Berlin during 1930, who called them ring youth gangs and typified their attitude. So this is smack dab in the middle of Weimar. Typified their attitude with the phrase, a hatred of society. They supported themselves through crime, petty burglary, theft, larceny, and prostitution, both male and female. What was extraordinary about the youth ring gangs was the sheer number and the sophisticated savagery of their social structure. Prospective members had to go through sexual rituals, a pagan baptism often involving public intercourse or masturbation before admission. The initiation ceremony almost always degenerated, according to Christine Fournier, into a drunken binge, a mad orgy. She called it a spontaneous return to barbarism. So, very, very interesting. People really forget what an absolute shit show Weimar was. Absolute disaster. After he creates Nature Boy, this is his new version of Superman, Mr. Muscles, the world's most perfect man. Mr. Muscles, he's an Apollo. Wow, look at those rippling muscles. Yeah. Brett Carson, better known as Mr. Muscles, demonstrates some of the astounding feats of physical strength which have made him world famous. If I had a magnificent body like that, I'd show off. I'm fun. Jerry Siegel thought he was funny, and it's really painful. It's really painful because he puts all these bad jokes in all his stories, and it's sad. It's really sad. This story, though, Mr. Muscles and False Treasure. Richard Altman had everything, money, clothes, all the things that heir to a great fortune could want, but he didn't have friends, real health, or a chance to develop normally. Yeah. His guardian, Everett Lamar, had his own reasons for keeping him secluded until the day came when Brett Carson, known as Mr. Muscles, met him. So they're fighting over this pale young boy. That's kind of normal. Yeah. Wimpy rich kid Dick wanders off into a park, as one does, and just happens to chance upon Mr. Muscles behind a bush. Dick's chauffeur is understandably... this is my writing, by the way. Dick's chauffeur is understandably upset some random muscle man is hitting on his young charge. Mr. Muscles belts him and presses young Dick, who asked to come to his gymnasium. Later, Dick skips his dance class to visit Mr. Muscles at the gym. And the subtext here is just unbelievable. Mr. Muscles offers to weigh and measure him and to fit him with some trunks. Soon, Dick becomes the scantily clad Kid Muscles and comes along on his mentor's missions. So this is the story here. You know, Dick's sort of just wandering around. The chauffeur is changing a tire. I'm just going to wander over here. And then all of a sudden there's a muscle man just showing up out of nowhere. Hello, Jeepers. You have big muscles. I wish I could be like that when I grow up. Why can't you? In fact, why wait until then? A little exercise in sports would put some useful weight on you. Honestly, Mr. Lamar wouldn't let me. He says he doesn't want me to. Shh, here's Carl. Hey, get away from that kid before I break you in half. That would be quite a trick buster. Be careful, mister. And again, here, this is Jerry Siegel. It just always... immediately goes to conflict and violence. And here they're fighting over this pale young boy here. And then Mr. Muscles bends the tire iron. I'd like to come to your gym, Mr. Muscles. I hope Mr. Lamar will permit it. Who's Mr. Like, what is his relationship to this boy? Like, how is he in charge of this young boy? Where's his father? Where's his parents? Like, where's his family? Why is this young boy, looks to be about 12, hanging around with this random guy named Mr. Lamar? So, and then he has a big fight. He takes him home. And where have you been, Dick? I warned you not to wander off. Lay off, Lamar. The chauffeur will explain. The car had a flat tire and Carl had a little accident. I took Dick home because I'd like a chance to build him up a little. He needs it badly. Don't be ridiculous. Richard is sickly. He will always be. Now get out of here before I call the police. Like, all these stories, like the premises of them are like really, really creepy. And then, Dick, what are you doing here? Does Lamar know where you are? I'm supposed to be at dancing school. The owner doesn't care just as long as he gets paid. I wanted to come here instead. Fine. First, we'll get you a pair of trunks and then weigh and measure you. The other kids are bigger and outweigh me. I couldn't play on the teams even if they let me. What is this a setup for? What is this a setup for? It's almost like the best interpretation that you can make this is like a cautionary ABC after school special about how to avoid, muscle men who have an unusual interest in pale young boys. What is wrong with this guy? What is wrong with him? So then, this is another story, and Mr. Muscles flies into his car. Kid Muscles. So now Dick is called Kid Muscles. Hates to be left out when action's poppin'. But a man's life is in peril and time's wasting. But don't worry, Mr. Muscles. Kid Muscles drops right in. Yeah, the one and only Kid Muscles. So now he's Kid Muscles. You see, he's rather... look at this! What is going on? What is going on? Like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, why did he think this was okay to write a story like this? And his Kid Muscles again, and his little leotard there, and like, what's going on in that last panel there? You fixed Mr. Muscles, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about, you crazy kid. Take your hands off me. He's putting his hands all over this guy. Look at that frame there. The kid's after me. I don't want to tangle with his bulging muscles. And then more, young boys working out. Firm muscles replace scrawny limbs. So, like I said, this was a bottom of the barrel publisher that hires Jerry Siegel, who can't get work anywhere else, and says, okay, we want you to give us a new Superman. And this is what he gives them. This, yeah. Also does Zaza the Mystic. So again, here's his occultism that we see throughout his career from the very earliest days. Zaza. And I guess this is a takeoff on Zsa Zsa Gabor, who would have been popular at the time as a sex pot, Hungarian sex pot, right? So after he's fired from DC, he goes to Gold Key, which is another not very prestigious house, and creates Tiger Girl and the Owl. Okay. Now that image on the left, I wonder if you got the idea from Darker Than You Think, the cover for Darker Than You Think. But again, there's always a weird kind of subtext with, here we've got hypnosis. A lot of mind control throughout his stories, mind control and hypnosis and occultism. And there's always these secret societies. This is the Secret Society of Birds of Prey here. Kind of like the, what is that? The Parliament of Owls. And then this Another cabal dressed like Cobra Commander here. Actually, a lot like Cobra Commander, and 15 years prior. So, kind of wonder if they got the idea from that. But again, this is the occult and mind control and all these kind of things throughout his career. And again, this guy was at the top of the heap, and he blew it. He blew it. He got greedy. He got greedy. He was making a lot of money. And should have just wrote it. But I wonder what happened to the money. I mean, what happened to all that money? Did he just burn through it? Very, very strange. All right, so we're in the home stretch here. The final is going to be a lot shorter. All right, a lot shorter. Give me just a moment to set up, and we'll get through it. But I think you can see what I'm talking about. I mean, these stories are, I don't want to say, well, I do want to say sick. I mean, a lot of these stories are just sick. They're the products of a sick mind, or as I say, a shattered psyche. They're the products of a shattered psyche that we've allowed to infect our cultural DNA. And like I said, I've never been a Superman fan. Something bothers me about that character. There's just something wrong. There's something hollow about it. And I think maybe I feel that way. I mean, I've never liked the character, but maybe I feel that way now, I've known about how screwed up these guys are for a while. But after going through their, like really pouring through their work, just like these guys are bent. They're bent. They're broken men. They're shattered psyches. All right, I'm going to take a drink break, and then we'll wrap this up. All right, here we go. We're gonna get this puppy put to bed here. So again, Siegel's really fallen on hard times, and Stan Lee, who is just a total mensch. I get so angry. I get so angry. One of the reasons why I've almost, well, completely cut off any connection to particularly like the Kirby fandom or comics fandom in general is the crap they say about Stan Lee, which is just disgusting. I mean, Stan Lee was not, Jack Leibowitz. Stan Lee was a good guy who treated people well. And all the stuff you hear, from the Kirby people, forget it. It's all bullshit. Stan Lee had no control over that stuff. So he writes a couple Human Torch stories under his alias Joe Carter. There, okay. Now this is very interesting. He writes this this is Angel from the X-Men. Again, the writing is terrible, terrible, terrible writer, just an absolute terrible writer. And we see like just the constant conflict and the constant antagonism with everyone, because this man was broken up inside. It's almost like the two halves of his psyche are fighting with each other, fighting with themselves, and that becomes expressed on the page. But so here's this whole story. Now, there's an interesting backstory here, but Magneto says ordinary humans and Homo Superior can't live together in peace, but the people on Earth I love the most, Mom and Dad, belong to Homo sapiens. Okay, so you probably know that song, "Oh, You Pretty Things." That's where Homo Superior comes from. Bowie was a huge comic book fan. Ziggy Stardust is based on Captain Marvel. So here's this whole story. Now, again, this is like, again, with the subtext. My parents don't know that I'm a mutant. So when I fly, it's got to be on the sly. Or on the down low. When I walk around ordinary men in my identity of Worthington III, I've got to look like them. I've got to dress like them. And everybody, the writing is terrible. And one of the aspects of his terrible writing is that his characters are always saying what they're doing. They're always just like, this is what I'm doing now, and I'm doing it because I'm doing it, and this is what I feel like, and I feel like this because I'm doing this. It's just absolutely god-awful writing, and he never got better. It's like he never learned how to write properly. But then there's this story where his father is killed, and so talk about interesting subtext here. His father is killed while he's on a date with this sexy girl here, riding around, and then on the radio he hears that his father's been murdered. Dad, he hears that his father's been murdered, and he just flies into a rage. Obviously, understandably, the vermin that killed my father must feel safe from capture. They won't escape justice. Again, it's just like, he just doesn't know how to write. He doesn't know how to write a coherent story. And it's like everything that we see, he has to also explain. It's just very redundant. It's very redundant. And he's just flying into a rage. And of course, we saw this whole strange subtext. My parents don't know I'm a mutant. When I fly, it's going to be on the sly. And then he's like, blaming himself. If I hadn't dated you, my father would be alive right now. So lovely, so deadly. So his father died because he was running around with this girl. And this character called the Dazzler, which is not the Dazzler from the 70s, but there we go. So again, the subtext of this is just so Freudian. The Freudian upon Freudian upon Freudian layers of, there we go. With Warren, All My Love, Candy. Name's Candy, too. Candy Jones, right? Now, the thing that's interesting about this story is that Siegel's own father was murdered. Not murdered. He died after a robbery. So his store was robbed. 3 robbers came in. And then the shock of it had killed his father. His father died of a heart attack after his store was robbed, which is really a horrible story. And I think, and this happened in 32. So this happened after he had already started working on his comics and stuff. So I do wonder if this had an effect on him, because he seemed to be very attached to his father. There's a lot of these kind of, separation from father, obviously with Superman's origin, separated from his father, sent into space while his father dies on Krypton. So I think this was a very, obviously, extremely traumatic experience, but I think that it might have had a lot of influence on shattering his psyche. That he was very attached to his father, and we see characters like this expressing it, expressing their attachments to their fathers who are killed. So this is clearly autobiographical. It's a self-insert. And it might have something to do with that his father died of a heart attack after being held up, after his store was held up. I do feel sympathy for him. I don't think that makes, it doesn't make me recognize the fact that he's any less shattered, but this might have been what had a huge effect on that shattering, How old was he at the time? I think he was around 18 years old. Yeah. Actually, maybe he was like 16. I should look that up. So he's still in school, and his father dies after his store is held up. Very, very upsetting. Very, very traumatic. Obviously, very traumatic, and seems to have a very transformational effect on his psyche. And it could be like, the feelings that his father's death aroused might have played into this constant sense of antagonism and conflict that he expresses in his stories, where he can't go like 2 or 3 panels without somebody hitting somebody else or somebody arguing. He's broken inside, very, very deeply broken. So this is in the 70s. Neil Adams, who was the hot artist at the time, he took it, he was a big creator rights guy. He wanted to start a union. He was really big into self-publishing and creators' rights and self-ownerships and copyright and everything like that. He was as crazy as they get, and he was a major a-hole, but he definitely did right by a lot of people as far as their rights and so on. The story that I had heard, and I had interviewed somebody who had worked for him. He had a studio in New York, and one of his artists had brought in a plate of hash brownies for a party. He made hash brownies for a party, and he brought in a sort of a container full of them. And Neil, if you've ever seen or met Neil Adams, he clearly enjoyed eating quite a bit, and he ate the entire container full of hash brownies. And apparently when everybody showed up for work the next day, he was half naked on the couch in the lounge of his office, and he was telling everybody that he was dying. Sounds like a really horrific experience. Eating a party's worth full of hash brownies couldn't have a salutary effect on anyone. But before that happened, he helped Shuster and Siegel and Jerry Robinson, who worked on Batman, did a lot of the creative work for Bob Kane, who was just a total fraud. Helped them get pensions from DC. So the cheated creators myth, they were not cheated, gained traction when the first Superman film was in development, and figures like Neil Adams highlighted Siegel's and Shuster's later financial struggles. At the time, Siegel was working as a clerk typist for the state of California, making $7,000 a year. So he's making $7,000 a year in the 70s. And remember, he was making $18,000 or the equivalent of $18,000 a week in 1941 or 1939. I mean, that was a major come down, which he was using to support himself, his wife, and his daughter. Joe Shuster was blind in one eye and unemployed, living with his brother in Forest Hills. Both men's health were failing, and both were facing their golden years being full of poverty and want. That's from Film Buff. In the wake of the bad publicity, Warner Brothers provided Siegel and Shuster with a pensions of $20,000 per year, about $90,000 in $25. increased to $30,000 with health insurance benefits and restored credit. So, a lot of people who are into comics, especially older people into comics, always had like real major daddy issues. And I think a lot of the nonsense we hear about Stan Lee or about DC and all these people are really just them really projecting their daddy issues onto these other people. Siegel and Shuster brought their own problems upon themselves. DC did not cheat them. And this is the Jeanette Kahn era. And Jeanette Kahn, like, what did I write? It's like, if you told me that she gave her creators back rubs every time they came into the office, I wouldn't doubt you. This is a very, very artist-friendly regime under Jeanette Kahn and Dick Giordano. So just don't believe it. The problems that these men had were of their own making and were of their own very deep-seated psychological problems. No doubt about that. But this is how people like Rick Veitch, these boomer comics geeks, it's like, these guys are all villains. They're all rip-off artists. They're all sleazebags and everything. It's just not true. It's just not true. And Jack Leibowitz was upset about it. So he's still the CEO at the time. He would give Siegel and Shuster money for humanitarian reasons, but he wouldn't be happy about it. He said, quite rightly, they have no legal rights. All the press conferences and TV shows can't get you anything that isn't yours. Everyone gets humanistic about that. But it is being distorted when you work for the phone company and they make zillions from your invention. Do you think they are entitled to a piece of those zillions? You work for a salary, so you get a salary. We made Superman value through our efforts and abilities. Aren't you supposed to profit from your business and the money put into it? Yeah, Superman would have been nothing. It was the promotional power of DC that kept that character, going. Yes, they created it, and they were well compensated for particularly in relation to other people. Forget about it. It's like they have no reason to complain. And I understand why Jack Leibowitz was pissed off, because it kind of makes me pissed off, because I think about all the creators who didn't have a free ride and didn't blow it. A very sick man. All right, we're wrapping this up now. Jerry Siegel's last work was one of the most insane and disturbing comic book stories you'll ever read. It was called The Starling. It was a backup story in Destroyer Duck. And it is everything I said about his work, that it's just all antagonism and violence. Here he's, this is a direct market book, so he doesn't have to go through the Comics Code Authority, meaning it doesn't have to be censored. So he just lets it all fly. In the spring of 1968, Irma Zane was rescued from a brutal would-be rapist by a golden, glowing Adonis from another world. And, go from there and just straight into the horrific violence. This woman getting her throat slashed. And then, here, let me help you. Bastard, he's copying a free, kicks him in the nuts. This entire strip is just unbelievably repellent. It's just constant violence. But also, as we'll see shortly. So this woman is just in this constant state of, you're horrible, you're monster, you're cruel like him, you deceived me, you want to destroy me. See, I just think this is all projections of all his feelings of persecution, which probably originally stemmed from his father's death, but, and also here it's, it's a missing father. So I clearly think that the father's death had an incredibly negative and transformational effect on his psyche. Damn You Glow. It's just, everything is just, the artwork is terrible, first of all, but it's just, this woman is in a constant state of just psychopathy and hysteria. But yeah, the pale young boy, the shirtless young boy that we talked about in the 80s. Stream, here it is again. There's the shirtless young boy with his legs spread open and his hot pants, his little short shorts, and the mother again in this state of this is like Jerry Siegel Unbound. You know, it's like all the weird subtext and undertones of his stories all just smashed into the absolutely most unpleasant series I think I've ever read. And there he is in his short shorts again and his legs spread. I'm glowing. And then this guy is also got his short shorts on and he's got his legs spread. It's like, what is going on with this guy? It's like his brains are just fried at this point. I wonder if he had Alzheimer's or something. It's just, why is he sitting like that? Like, what is this? What's going on here? This is insane. But this made me laugh. You know, he can't quite figure out the 80s. You know, he's still got the disco ball going, but you know, he's got the computer and then the headband and the jogging, and then a little joke about Van Halen. You know, it's like, who's a popular group one of these days? Those stupid rock groups, I can't stand that crap. What are these kids listening to these days? Van Halen? All right, I'll put that in there. It's like, eat a dog log and die. It's like everybody is so unpleasant to each other in all of these stories. It's like every story he wrote, people are just so awful to each other. It's just insane. Anyway, that was his farewell to the world of comics. This repulsive story that's just filled with perversion and murder and it makes me want to wash my eyes out after looking at this crap. Never mind that the drawing is god awful. Finale. Thank you for sticking with me, folks. We're in the home stretch now. We're in the final I can't even think anymore. I think I'm getting hypoxia. Finale, The Curse. Now, this is an actual press release written by Jerry Siegel in October 1975. I, Jerry Siegel, the co-originator of Superman, put a curse on the Super movie. I hope it super bombs. I hope loyal Superman fans stay away from it in droves. I hope the whole world, becoming aware of the stench that surrounds Superman, will avoid the movie like a plague. Very, very, very angry man. He puts a curse on the movie. But maybe he's been putting curses a lot longer than the movie. Let's talk about The Curse of Superman. Curse of Superman. Kirk Alyn played Superman in 2 low-budget 1940 serials, but failed to find work afterward due to typecasting. Alyn had Alzheimer's later in life, died in 1999 at the age of 88. Okay. Oh, it's not all that, you know, it sucks, but lived to 88, you know. I mean, a lot of actors get typecast. But then this one, George Reeves shot himself to death, or so they say. He was banging, I think he was banging the wife or the girlfriend of Eddie Mannix, who was a big Hollywood fixer at the time. Basically a gangster working for the studios. 1959. They made a movie about this. Ben Affleck, Hollywoodland. Yeah, nobody really thinks he killed himself. Pretty sure he got knocked off for putting his hands in the wrong cookie jar, so to speak. Now this is ironic. In 1962, the week before he was set to marry a second wife, Harry Donenfeld fell, injuring his head, which resulted in a lack of memory and speech from which he never recovered. He died at a care home in New York City in 1965 and is buried in Mount Ararat Ceremony, East Farmingdale, New York. So Jerry Siegel's big nemesis, Harry Donenfeld, falls and sustains a major brain injury. 1962. 3 years after the Superman death. Max Fleischer and Dave Fleischer, who produced the Superman cartoons for Paramount, again the only Superman stuff that I really enjoy, began to quarrel and their studio suffered a financial disaster. After selling to Paramount in 1942, the new owners fired the two brothers. Max died in poverty in a charity hospital in 1972, while Dave died of a stroke in 1979. Very sad. Very talented guys. Betty Boop. I love Betty Boop. Love it. Very talented. Very, very talented fellas. Really tragic. Friggin' Hollywood already, right? Lee Quigley, who played the infant Superman in the 1978 film, came from an unstable home and suffered schoolyard bullying. He died in 1991 at age 14 from inhalant abuse. That's pretty rough. Boys at school would want to fight him if they knew he was Superman. Marlon Brando, we'll get into him in just a minute. Richard Pryor, Superman 3, who had previously had a drug addiction that led to a near-fatal suicide attempt. 3 years later, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Died of a heart attack on December 2005 at the age of 65. I think he was wheelchair-bound for the rest of his life. Yeah. I remember the freebasing thing. Second and third degree burns over the upper 50% of his body. Horrible. That is awful. Awful. Such a talented fella. Actor Christopher Reeve was paralyzed in a riding accident, spent the rest of his life as a quadriplegic. Terrible, terrible shame. Terrible story. Dana Reeve, the widow of Christopher Reeve, despite being a non-smoker, died of lung cancer in 2006 at the age of 44. Marlon Brando's son, Christian, shot his half-sister Cheyenne's boyfriend in, what was his name? Something like Drago or something. 1990. Cheyenne committed suicide in 1995. Superman's dad, Jor-El. Daughter was beautiful, too. Such a terrible, like half, his mother was, what, Tahitian or something? So beautiful, beautiful girl. Gene Hackman, who played Lex Luthor in the first two films, died under mysterious circumstances with his wife and dog in February 2025. It was later discovered that he had died a week after his wife, Betsy Arakawa, who died of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Terrible story. Terrible, terrible. These people should have people looking after them. Awful, awful story. Superman actress Margot Kidder's death ruled as suicide, dead at 69. She had a lot of problems. She was bipolar. Lot of problems with her. Played Lois Lane in the original films. Allison Mack. Oh, look at how adorable she is. Who played Chloe Sullivan on the TV series Smallville, was accused of sex trafficking and forced human labor and was arrested in April 2018 on those charges. That's Nexium. She was Keith Raniere's right-hand woman there. On April 8th, 2019, Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy and admitted to state law extortion and forced labor. In July 2021, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. God, she was cute. Superman Curse returns. The so-called Curse of Superman has struck again, this time the makers of the DVD for the new blockbuster Superman Returns. One tumbled down the stairs. Another was mugged and beaten up, and a third smashed into a glass window. What the hell? Bryan Singer, the director of the new film, which opens in cinemas tomorrow, says, "My DVD crew absorbed the curse for us." Not so fast, Bryan. You got some curse coming after you, brother. Bryan Singer accused of sexual abuse days after his film receives Oscar nod. I was talking about Bohemian Rhapsody. An investigation in the Atlantic details claims of abuse and sexual assault from 4 men who said they were minors at the time. Not minors like coal miners, but minors. Children. Singer is accused outright of rape and assault. In others, he's accused of sexual encounters and misconduct while the men were underage. Singer engaged in other predatory behavior dating back to 1997, and that he was sometimes aided by people around him. Yep, there we go. And finally, Kevin Spacey's career was derailed, and he was later bankrupted by a series of accusations of sexual assault. He's still alive, though, so his enemies should be afraid. Very, very afraid. The real-life Lex Luthor. Well, he's on the comeback trail already. Don't count this guy out. He skated on it. Might have bankrupted him, but he kept himself out of jail. And all those cases were dropped and so on. But there you go. I drove by the spot where one of his witnesses was hit by a car. One of his accusers was hit by a car some years ago when I made my Back to Braintree videos. It was in Quincy Center, across the street from the Stop and Shop tower there. Was where one of Kevin Spacey's accusers was run down. Don't mess with Kevin Spacey, people. Don't mess with that dude. I'm telling you right now. There's something weird about him. Something weird about him. So, Curse of Superman, all right? Now, a lot of people poo-poo it. Just say it's coincidence. But remember what I was talking about? How the DNA, the mimetic DNA of shattered men insinuates itself into our cultural DNA and replicates itself, right? And this is an extreme example of what I'm talking about. This is an extreme emanation of what I'm talking about. But in some ways, we're kind of all under the Superman curse, just a little bit, just to a small extent. But again, as I've shown you through 3 hours and change now, is that these were very, very disturbed individuals. And you see it in their artwork. And the fact that Superman has this wholesome and all-American kind of reputation is something that people should resist. You should educate people against that, because even when you take out all the nonsense that Seagel was putting into these stories, you're still left with an egregore. Like Superman is like an egregore, and it's the wizard who created him, for the most part, was Jerry Siegel. And he was a very disturbed individual, as we saw through all these stories. Clearly, great deal. I mean, I think Gershon Legman was spot on when he sensed all the repressed homosexuality in those stories. But repressed pedophilia, repeated from Slam Bradley, from his very earliest strips, this muscle man hanging around with a young boy. I mean, really, Mr. Muscles with kid muscles is just an updating on Slam Bradley and Shorty, right? So, again, one of the reasons why, I'd always wanted to do comic books, but one of the reasons why I couldn't stay in the comic book business and only worked in it for a few short years was I just noticed just how broken everybody was. Not everyone, but so many people in that business are broken inside. They're shattered psyches, and I just couldn't be around it. And I think that as I said before, the fact that these shattered psyches came to dominate our culture for so long and at such a crucial point in our history goes a long way to explaining why things are such a mess, why everything is dying. Everything is dying. Like all our culture is dying. Our social norms are dying. Our communities are dying. Because that's what happens. That's the end result of demoralization and degeneracy is cultural death. You hear like these stupid people like, oh, hey man, I watched, this horror movie and I'm fine. Well, that's debatable, but that's not the point. It's like when you have this constant barrage of darkness and negativity, it demoralizes you and it demoralizes society. And that is the problem. That's the problem. That is the problem. But I also think that, as I said in the introduction, immersing ourselves in juvenile fantasy is not healthy, particularly because those juvenile fantasies themselves are unhealthy, as we saw. Anyway, I've been talking for more than 3 hours, and I think I'm ready to not talk anymore. So if anybody's got anything to say, I'll dunk into the comments and see what is going on out there. I don't want to look at Kevin Spacey, though. Let me get something else up. Oh, this is what I want to look at. That's what I want to look at right now. All right, that's our freeze frame. Anyway. I can't keep. Wow, this is crazy. This is a lot of chat going on. I don't know if I can keep up with it all. Demo says, I'm awake, but man, am I black-pilled. Don't be black-pilled. That's demoralization. Don't be black-pilled. All right? That's not the point. That is demoralization. Shattered psyches are everywhere you look right now. Yeah, believe me. You have it right, Glenn. Absolutely. I like to take coloring book images of Taylor Swift and make them into horror drawings. No, you're not okay. Chris, I get the feeling Siegel really hated his mom. I think that's probably, that's a fair assessment. I think that is a fair assessment. All right. Chris, you know more about comics than I know about the cosmos. I was reading all these books on comics history and everything from like very, very young. Very, very young. Very, very young. I really think we need to retire all the superheroes. I'm not kidding. It's enough. 100 years of superhero stories is enough. It's time to move on and tell other kinds of stories. You know, no matter how profitable they might be to some studios, it's enough. Stop it. Stop it. Tell other stories. There are, you know, there's a whole range of human experience to draw on other than just like muscle men punching each other. Draw effed up stuff all the time. Never draw something effed up. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Would you say your work in the industry helped lead you to your current path? Yeah, yeah. It's like I don't want anything to do with the comic book industry. You know, I grew up loving comic books, you know, because it was escapism, because my life was incredibly fucked up. But you know, I don't want anything to do with it. There's, you wouldn't believe, you know, talk about shattered psyches. I mean, Jerry Siegel is like Mr. Normal compared to some of the people that I've encountered in the comic book industry and conventions and all the rest of it. Believe me, as screwed up as that guy was, there are so many worse minds in that industry. It's just mess. It's a mess. Wortham was right. Wortham was right. You know, I don't want to get a tattoo because, like, what would I want to look at for the rest of my life? Wortham was right would be a great tattoo because he was right. He was exactly right. He took so much crap and all these freaks just piled on him for years. But he was right and he's vindicated. Batman is just a cop that does police brutality. Well, they all are. You know, that's what when I was reading, you know, the Gershon Legman quotes from the book. I kind of messed up some of those excerpts a bit. I apologize for that. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, they're basically vigilante lawmen, you know. You're welcome, Glenn. Yeah, this was a lot of work. And like I said, like I want my brain to take a nice hot bath after immersing myself in all this sick insanity, you know, just, you know, the thing that I wonder about, like, you know, when you see all this stuff with like all this really creepy pedophilia and stuff, it's like, was that all conscious or was that just like the unconscious contents expressing themselves? And it really makes me wonder, you know, because there's so much of it in comic books, particularly that time and that publisher, for real. I mean, there's tons of it in Batman, tons of it in Wonder Woman, there's tons of it in Superman. It's like all, you know, Jimmy Olsen like putting on a dress and like going to his fan club and like spraying them with this, like, what is going on? What is that about? That's like crazy. Good night, Aki Guinea. Thank you for joining us. You are welcome, Aki Guinea. Thank you very much for sharing that. Somebody said willing to bet all the tragedies from Reeve Superman is because they didn't join the Satanic Club like Michael J. Fox. Did he join the Satanic Club? Were you saying like he's like Christopher Reeve? See, whenever I see somebody get Parkinson's or anything like that, I always think like a history of cocaine abuse. So Glenn says, I used to go to Comic Cons but stopped because I couldn't stand the people or their bizarre mentalities. It's not something fun with them, it's religion. Yeah, it's religion for shattered psyches. Exactly. The women hating and weird kink is just so out there in all of it. Thanks for waiting through all of that. Yeah. I hate I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate sexual violence. I hate violence against women, sexual violence against women. I hate all this stuff so intensely. Glenn's going to send me an email. Thank you. Marco asked, did you ever get around to checking out Grant Morrison's Super Gods book? Yes, I did. And I kind of felt like he was poaching on my land a little bit, to be honest with you. But whatever. I had written some critical things about him in a column in Comic Book Artist back in the day, and I think he never forgave me for it. So, but you know what? I don't care. Screw him. Who's Grant Morrison? Like, what is that? Who cares? Nobody cares about Grant Morrison. Bright Lights Big City was a bio for. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty well known that Parkinson and MS, well, less so MS, but there's a lot of people who get Parkinson's who had a history of cocaine abuse. Okay, it's a well-known connection. What do I think about the notion that heroes are the masters of the status quo, or the villains are the agents of change? Well, I think that's a classically satanic mindset. So that's my answer. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you very much. I'm having a hard time getting some of these comments to. It's like I'm kind of stopped at some point. Well, makes no mind. I'll try and check them out tomorrow. Oh, by the way, important announcement. I'm going to be moving the Anne Heche live stream to August 10th, which is the day before the third anniversary of her death. Okay, so it's not going to be next week. I'm going to move it to August 10th, so we can, timing is everything. I just want to sort of sync that up a little bit better with the date of her passing, and that way it'll give me a little more time to do a little bit more deep diving, because I think that the depth of the darkness in that story is going to be really, I mean, I sort of always had like a thing for her, to be honest with you. And I read her book, her first book. I don't think I didn't read her second book. But I want to do it I want to do her justice. And I kind of, it's going to be very difficult, but I want to kind of wade through a lot of the theorizing and so on, and just see how bad it gets. I don't know. I always felt this like weird kinship with her. I can't even explain it. But like I said, I want to just sync it up a little bit more with the anniversary of her passing. Yeah, Ellen. Yeah, I want to look into the Ellen angle. Ellen's had some, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's going to be a major point of research for this work. Absolutely. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, she, Aunt Heche always had that kind of pixie vibe going on. You know how I am about my pixies. Case in point on screen right now. All right, 1 o'clock. I'm stopping the broadcast right now. Here we go.